Chapter 859. Wong Can's bloodline was one of the 9 cauldrons of the witch tribe. Naturally, he had to inform them about the mountain and sea realm. However, according to Wong Can, he didn't know Nangong, which meant that they hadn't met before. Nangong had been planning for the mountain and sea realm for thousands of years. Since Wong Can's bloodline was a witch tribe and the leader of the paradise, their power couldn't be compared to others. Nangong should have informed them earlier to help him. I didn't understand why he had come to Wangwu Grotto Heaven to inform Wong Can only now. Thinking about that, I voiced out the doubts in my heart, hoping that Nangong could help me dispel them. After listening to me, Nangong calmly waved his hand, indicating that we shouldn't talk about it for the time being. It wouldn't be too late to talk about it after Wong Can arrived. After a while, Wong Can hurried over and apologized to us, saying that he had some urgent matters to deal with. That was why we were delayed. Wong Can had to take care of everything in Wangwu Grotto Heaven, which was a bit difficult for him, but I didn't mind. After Wong Can took a seat, Nangong still didn't want to tell us why he had come. He just chatted with Wong Can. At first, I was a little worried, but as I listened, I learned something. From what Nangong said, it seemed he'd been to Wangwu Grotto Heaven some years ago, and he even knew Wong Can's father. As soon as Wong Can heard that Nangong knew his father, he looked happy. Then, he asked, "Junior is a little blind. I didn't know that you were my father's good friend. However, my father has never mentioned that he has a good friend in the outside world." Nangong's expression didn't change. He just replied, "In the past 100 years, I've been busy with many things, so I haven't been to Wangwu Grotto Heaven. It's normal that you don't know about it." After hearing that, Wong Can looked a little surprised. However, he quickly recovered. He seemed to realize that since Nangong was a friend of his father, he was definitely not an ordinary person. Then, he changed the topic and didn't talk about it anymore. After about half an hour, Wong Can seemed to feel that this kind of chat was very boring. So he asked Nangong what he wanted to tell him today. Nangong didn't answer. He asked Wong Can if his father had told him about the mountain and sea realm. Wong Can didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me and then at Nangong. From the looks of it, it was clear that he already knew. Hence, there was no need to waste any more words. Nangong seemed to have understood. He nodded and asked again, "Did your father explain anything about the Wangwu Grotto Heaven?" "Wangwu Grotto Heaven has a forbidden area? I've been here more than once or twice. Why haven't I heard Wong Can mention it?" However, thinking about it from another perspective, this Wangwu paradise was the head of the paradise, possessing 4 true dragon veins and 1,000 mountains. Moreover, it had been passed down for several thousand years, so it wasn't strange for a forbidden area to exist. However, Wong Can didn't even tell me about the forbidden area. Why did Wong Can's father tell Nangong? After thinking about it for a while, I guessed that Officer Wong's father knew about Nangong's plan. The two of them had some kind of agreement. It seemed Nangong had come for the Forbidden Land this time. To be exact, he had come for something in the Forbidden Land. Thinking about this, I gave Nangong a questioning look. However, he ignored me and stared at Officer Wong as if he was waiting for his response. After hearing this, Wong Can's face darkened in an instant. There was a trace of vigilance in his eyes, and he asked Nangong why he mentioned this. I could understand why he looked like this. Officer Wong wasn't an impulsive person. Since the forbidden area was top secret, Officer Wong naturally wanted to figure out Nangong's real purpose. Seeing this, Nangong's expression didn't change. He just replied indifferently, "You don't need to be so vigilant. I'm here today to be a witness." His words were interesting. Why did he come here to be a witness? Officer Wong was like me. He didn't know what Nangong meant, so he asked Nangong what he meant. After listening to him, Nangong stood up and whispered to Officer Wong the thing to open the mountain and sea realm. Hearing this, I was startled. The things to open the mountain and sea realm were the jade bracelet, the key, and the 10 divine tools. The jade bracelet and the key had been mastered one by one, and the only things missing were the 10 divine tools. Could it be that there was a divine tool in the Wangwu Paradise's forbidden area? 9 of the 10 divine tools had been revealed. In that case, the one in the Wangwu Paradise was the last one. Except for the Xianyuan sword in my hand and the Kunlun mirror in Nangong's hand, Nangong had never touched any of the previous divine tools. He had come here to be a witness. Presumably, he couldn't wait to open the mountain and sea realm. At this time, Officer Wong reacted. He frowned and asked, "Did my father tell Senior about this?" Nangong nodded, confirming Officer Wong's words. Seeing this, Wongkin did not respond immediately. He seemed to weigh the pros and cons in his mind. After a while, he looked up at Nangong again and said, "My father once told me that the forbidden area was a top secret. Unless you have a token, you can't tell me the location of the forbidden area." After saying that, Officer Wong turned to look at me as if he was apologizing. I shook my head and said, "It doesn't matter. I'm not an unreasonable person. Since his father told me to do this, why should I care about Officer Wong's concealment?" However, Nangong didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took out the Kunlun mirror, which was wrapped in witch chi. Then, he waved his hand, and the Kunlun mirror revealed its original appearance. Then, he handed it to Officer Wong and said, "Is this what your father said?" Officer Wong took the Kunlun mirror, which was full of spiritual energy. After checking it over and over again, he looked surprised and exclaimed, "This is the Kunlun mirror, an ancient divine tool?" Officer Wong looked at Nangong. After confirming that he was right, he looked away and stared at the Kunlun mirror for a long time. Then, he returned it to Nangong. Then, he stood up and bowed to Nangong. "Senior, please forgive me for my presumptuous words. However, the forbidden area is really important. Moreover, my father told me to check it carefully. Before he left, my father did tell me that the person who came would bring the Kunlun mirror with him. When the time comes, I should listen to his instructions." Nangong waved his hand and gestured for Officer Wong to sit down. Then, he said, "Your father and I are close friends. You don't have to call me Senior. Just call me Uncle." Then, without waiting for Officer Wong's response, he gestured for him to go to the forbidden area. "We need to open the forbidden area today." Officer Wong was stunned. He looked at me with an apologetic face. It seemed that he didn't know the relationship between me and Nangong. I got up and told him that I had known Nangong for a long time. This was also confirmed by Nangong. After Wongkin heard it, he suddenly understood and said, "I understand." Since Nangong was so anxious, we didn't stay here for long. We left the palace and flew to the forbidden area. About 15 minutes later, we stopped in front of Mountain Stream. At first glance, I found that the mountain stream looked familiar. It seemed that I had been here before. After thinking about it carefully, I found that Han Wan-an and I had gone to the Wangwu cave to break the barrier of the Penglai immortal region. We found a Kylan there that day. However, except for the abundant spiritual energy here, I didn't find anything special. In my opinion, since it was a forbidden area, there should be a barrier or guard around it. But this place didn't look mysterious at all. Officer Wong, who was next to me, seemed to see my doubts. He explained to me, "There are only a few people in the Wangwu cave, but there are many things to do. Usually, no one will come here. Moreover, there's a formation outside. Without my permission, no one can enter. It's unnecessary to send guards here." Officer Wong's words were reasonable, but I still didn't see anything special about this place. I didn't know where the forbidden area was. Thinking of this, he was really curious. So he urged Wongkin to open the forbidden area immediately without further delay. After Officer Wong got the order, he didn't dare to delay. He flew to the waterfall in the mountain stream, made a hand seal, and mumbled something. A few seconds later, the waterfall was separated like a curtain, revealing a deep cave. The moment the cave appeared, I sensed an abundant amount of spiritual chi coming from inside. Could it be that this spiritual chi was emitted by the divine tool inside? However, I immediately denied this idea. As far as I knew, among the 10 divine weapons, only the Kunlun mirror had rich spiritual energy. It was created by the Kunlun goddess, and it hadn't experienced the primal chaos yet. The other 9 divine weapons had more or less primal chaos aura around them. In that case, the spiritual energy wasn't from the divine weapon. Perhaps there was a special formation inside. While I was pondering, Nangong had already walked into the cave. I didn't think too much and followed the 2 of them into the cave. As soon as I stood still, the cave suddenly became bright, and I could see the structure of the cave. Except for being a little spacious, it was no different from an ordinary cave. However, the spiritual energy in the cave was abundant, which made people feel comfortable. Moreover, there was a waterfall outside all year round, while there was no water at the entrance of the cave, which was strange. The cave seemed to be long and narrow, and the spiritual energy in front of us was even more abundant. After walking for 15 minutes, we stopped. However, I didn't see the divine weapon that Nangong had mentioned. Instead, there were several beams of light. There was a big gap between the beams, which allowed people to pass through easily. As I had guessed, the spiritual energy in the cave came from these beams. I didn't think that they were that simple. Since they were placed here, they must be used to stop people from entering the cave. Moreover, the spiritual energy in these beams wasn't inferior to any kind of energy. I guessed that even though I was a young god celestial master, I would be seriously injured if I tried to break through. Chapter 860. People with Yang Spirit Ascension were the strongest forces in the world. After Xiaju ascended, he would become an immortal, so he couldn't be compared with mortals. In the entire human world, only President Li, Celestial Master Zhang, the Lord of Penglai, the evil sacrificial spirit, and the Serpent King of the Liu clan had reached the Ascension realm. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that this secret formation was the strongest defense in the world. While I was thinking, Officer Wang stepped forward and took out a crescent-shaped jade ring. He spread his hands, and the jade ring soared into the air, flying toward the light beams. However, the jade ring didn't fly into the light beams as I had expected. Instead, it moved quickly in the air. A few seconds later, a strong suction force appeared in front of us. The light beams were sucked into the jade ring by this suction force. Now, the mysterious formation was completely opened, and there were no more spiritual energy fluctuations in the cave. After Officer Wang retrieved the jade ring, he turned around and signaled to us that we could move forward. We didn't linger here and followed Officer Wang. A moment later, a wisp of primal chaos aura appeared in front of us, but it was very weak. If my spiritual sense hadn't been so strong, I wouldn't have been able to detect it. Nangong's cultivation base was higher than mine, so he naturally sensed the aura. However, he looked pensive, and I didn't know what he was thinking about. At this moment, Officer Wang suddenly stopped and told us that we had arrived. Nangong and I came to our senses and stood side by side with Officer Wang. Although I knew that there was a divine weapon in the cave, I couldn't help but sigh when I took a closer look. There was an altar in front of us, and a weapon that looked like an axe was hovering in the air. The axe was shrouded in thick witchcraft energy. Seeing this scene, I understood why the primal chaos aura I had sensed earlier was so weak. Someone had deliberately isolated it. However, the primal chaos aura on this divine weapon was so strong that it was impossible to completely cover it. I clearly remembered that among the 10 great divine weapons, the one with the strongest primal chaos aura was the Pangu axe. Legend had it that at the beginning of the world's chaos, Pangu woke up from his sleep and saw that the world was dark. He took a huge axe and split the sky and the earth. That was how the world, the moon, and the starry sky came into being. This axe had the power to split the sky and the earth, and it could travel through the void. Its power wasn't weaker than the Xianyuan sword. The weapon in front of him was also in the shape of an axe. In that case, it was undoubtedly the Pangu axe. Nangong knew about it, but he didn't change his expression. He motioned Wang to come forward and take it out. Officer Wang didn't take action immediately. Instead, he observed the Pangu axe. After a while, he looked surprised and turned to look at us. Is this one of the 10 great divine weapons? Pangu axe? Judging from his shocked expression, it was obvious that he did not know that the Pangu axe was in the cave. However, based on what had happened between Nangong and Wang Can's father knew about it, which was why he asked Nangong to come and take it out after hundreds of years. It was not surprising that Wang Can's father did not tell him this news. After all, Wang Can was still young. In the face of this Pangu axe, Any normal person would have the impulse to take it as their own. Moreover, even if Wonka did not have this idea, it would lead to countless changes just by revealing the news. Therefore, Wong Can's father must have considered this and made the decision. After getting Nangong Injung, the shock on Officer Wong's face disappeared. It was replaced by surprise. He turned around and walked toward the Panga axe. When he was close to it, he raised his hands, and a flow of thick witch energy appeared in his palms. Then he grabbed the Panga axe. Nangong didn't stop him. I thought that he had tacitly allowed Officer Wong to take it out. However, as soon as Officer Wong touched the Pangu axe shook and sent Officer Wong flying. The witch energy in his hands couldn't stop it at all. Seeing this, I was also shocked. Although I had anticipated the power of the divine weapon, Officer Wong's cultivation base was extraordinary. Even though he was prepared, he still couldn't fight back. It was beyond my expectation. I was puzzled, and Officer Wong, who was lying on the ground, didn't know what was going on. After a while, we turned to look at Nangong. We wanted to get an answer from him. Nangong didn't pay attention to our eyes. He took a few steps forward and stood in front of the Panga axe. He frowned as if he was thinking about something. It was obvious that he didn't understand why the Pangu axe had such a strong self-defense ability. After a while, Nangong's frown eased a little. He turned around and asked Officer Wong, "Did your father tell you anything before he left?" Officer Wong was stunned when he heard his question. He tilted his head and pondered. After 10 seconds, he remembered something and said with uncertainty, "When my father left, he entrusted me with all the affairs of the Wangwu Cave and left me a jade ring. At that time, I asked him what the jade ring was, but my father didn't tell me anything. He just told me that it would be useful in the future, so I should keep it. Apart from that, my father didn't tell me anything else." The jade ring he mentioned was obviously the one that had been used to open the mysterious formation. When he was in the mysterious formation, he subconsciously took out the jade ring. Apparently, his father had told him about the connection between the jade ring and the formation. Since his father didn't tell me anything else, it was possible that the jade ring had something to do with the witch energy outside the divine weapon. While I was thinking about it, Nangong also had the same thought. Before I could say anything, he asked Officer Wong to take out the jade ring to test it. Officer Wong didn't refuse. He nodded and took out the jade ring again. When we were outside the formation, the jade ring could absorb the spirit energy from the light column. Obviously, it wasn't an ordinary item. I looked at it a few more times, but I didn't see anything special about it. While I was thinking, the jade ring left Officer Wong's hand and flew forward. Soon, it hit the witch energy wrapped around the Chiyu axe. However, what happened next was completely different from what I had expected. When the jade ring came into contact with the shaman chi, it suddenly exploded. However, the shaman chi did not dissipate. Instead, it gradually gathered into a shadow. No one had expected that the jade ring would explode. They were all shocked, but when they saw the phantom, Nangong and Officer Wong's expressions eased. Especially Officer Wong. When the phantom appeared, he immediately knelt and shouted, "Father!" When I saw him, I was startled. That phantom was Officer Wong's father. Didn't he ascend to the heavens and become an immortal? Why is he here? As soon as I had this thought, I understood. Of course, this phantom wasn't a real person. It should be a wisp of spiritual power left by Officer Wong. It was similar to the phantom of Shinnong that the Shinnong cauldron had summoned. Of course, even if it was just an illusion, Officer Wong had left it on purpose. Since it had appeared here, it was clear that he had something to tell him. As I had expected, Officer Wong's father didn't pay attention to Officer Wong's actions. Instead, he said in an ethereal voice, "Kinner, since you've opened the forbidden area, I presume Nangong has come to our Wanwu Grotto Heaven. Before you take the Pango axe, I have something to tell you." Wong Can's father looked very kind, and his voice was very soft. After he finished speaking, he paused for a moment, then continued. "The appearance of the Pangu axe means that the mountain and sea realm is no longer a secret location. Nangong is an elder of the Magi tribe. From now on, you must follow his instructions. Don't let your emotions affect your decisions. After the mountain and sea realm opens, there will be a bitter battle. When the time comes, you must do your best to protect the Magi tribe. The 9 cauldron clans will be led by Wangwu Grotto Heaven. You must gather the strength of the entire clan. First, you must welcome the people of the mountain and sea realm, and second, you must deal with the remaining demon tribe members. You must remember this. At this point, the illusory figure suddenly disappeared. What followed was a wave of majestic, chaotic energy. When Officer Wang heard this, he didn't know what to think. Clearly, his father had given him an order. The matter of the mountain and sea realm couldn't be avoided in Wangwu Grotto Heaven. After a moment, Officer Wang rose to his feet and walked toward the Pangu axe. As for me, I looked at Nangong. Although I knew that when the mountain and sea realm opened, there would be a catastrophe in the mortal world, I didn't know what to do. But after hearing Officer Wang's father mention it again, I had mixed feelings. Officer Wang's father didn't sound like a problem, but the truth was that Wangwu Grotto Heaven had already declined, and the 9 cauldron clans only had a few survivors. As for the Magi tribe, the only survivors were those from the Valley of the Medicine Kings. Whether it was to welcome the remaining people of the mountain and sea realm, or to defend against the demon tribe, they were stretched thin. If there were a lot of Magi left in the mountain and sea realm, it would be easier to deal with them. But when Demon Emperor Jun led the Magi to invade the mountain and sea realm, not even Shinnong could protect himself. How could the other Magi survive under the oppression of the demon tribe? I even wondered if there were still Magi left in the mountain and sea realm. As he pondered these questions, Officer Wang took the Pangu axe and handed it to Nangong. He bowed and said, "Officer Wang will obey your orders, Elder." Clearly, Officer Wang had heeded his father's instructions and had immediately expressed his stance to Nangong. Nangong smiled and helped him to his feet. Then he shook his head and said, "Wangwu Grotto Heaven will take care of the Pangu axe. When the mountain and sea realm opens, you will know what to do." Officer Wang didn't stand on ceremony. He put the Pangu axe away, then used a shaman chi to wrap it up to block out the primal chaos aura. He clearly understood the importance of a divine item. Right now, he was in Wangwu Grotto Heaven, so it was fine. However, if he were outside, the primal chaos aura would spread, and he feared that it would attract a lot of trouble. It was best to be careful. After everything was done, we didn't stay for long. We flew out of the cave and headed back to the palace we had come from. When we returned, Nangong told Officer Wang that the 10 great divine items had been used, and that it wouldn't be long before the mountain and sea realm opened. He told him to take care of the affairs in Wangwu Grotto Heaven, and then to go somewhere with him. After Officer Wang left, Officer Wang didn't have any more doubts. After listening to Nangong, he nodded and left to take care of the affairs in Wangwu Grotto Heaven. After Officer Wang left, only Nangong and I were left in the palace. Nangong didn't look as worried as he had before. He looked much more relaxed. He had been plotting for many years, all for the purpose of opening the mountain and sea realm and welcoming the revival of the Magi. Now that the time was near and his long-cherished wish was about to be fulfilled, he was naturally delighted. I, on the other hand, wasn't as relaxed as he was. I was still worried about the problem I'd been thinking about and was hesitating about whether or not I should discuss it with Nangong. Chapter 861. I thought about it for a long time before voicing my suspicions. When Nangong heard it, he looked at me with a mocking expression. After a long moment, he said, "How can you be so sure that there are still demon folk in the mountain and sea realm?" I stared blankly for a moment, then shook my head. The demon folk invaded the mountain and sea realm in large numbers. I can't say for sure, but it's definitely possible. Nangong pursed his lips and smiled. Back then, the demon folk were trapped in the mountain and sea realm, and their numbers weren't small. But so were the Magi. The Magi are the elites of the human race. Other than the Demon Emperor, who else could stand up to them? Even without the leadership of the Flame Emperor, they would have slaughtered the demon folk in the mountain and sea realm. Thousands of years have passed, and the Magi in the mountain and sea realm have long since flourished. How could there possibly be any demon folk left? Even if there were, they would be struggling at death's door. Listening to his words, my eyebrows furrowed even deeper. It was true that the Magi were in the mountain and sea realm, and that they outnumbered the demon folk. But exterminating them was easier said than done. Back then, outside the mountain and sea realm, the demon folk hadn't been exterminated by the combined forces of the human race and the Magi. How could they possibly exterminate the demon folk within the mountain and sea realm? As for what Nangong had said, that was just his speculation. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that this was his ideal situation. As for what would actually happen, I had no way of knowing. I was silent for a moment, then sighed and continued. Do you know that what you're doing is no different from gambling? We have no way of knowing what is going on in the mountain and sea realm. I can't deny what you're saying, but have you ever considered that the demon folk aren't as weak as they seem? If a large number of them show up, how will you defend against them? The situation in the mortal world is far more complicated than it was in ancient times. When the time comes, rivers of blood will flow. You only care about the legacy of the Magi, but have you ever considered the lives of the people in the world? My words were a bit harsh, but Nangong's expression didn't change. He shook his head and said, "It's not that I haven't considered what you're saying. I'll handle it myself. There's no need for you to worry. Since the mountain and sea realm is the goal of the entire human race, casualties are inevitable. However, to the legacy of the shaman tribe, such a price is insignificant." His word made me angry. I respected his dream of reviving the shaman race, but I could not agree with his attitude that he would rather die than let himself die. His so-called insignificant price could, in fact, be an earth-shattering matter. For him to be able to say such things so casually, it goes without saying that he was just trying to convince me to open the mountain and sea realm. Having reached this point in my train of thought, I gritted my teeth and told him that I would not agree to open the mountain and sea realm without a foolproof plan. Hearing this, Nangong's expression immediately darkened. After staring at me for a while, he suddenly lifted his leg and walked towards me. I had never seen him like this before. Now that I had made this decision, I was quite nervous. After all, this meant that I would have to become the enemy of all the cultivators in the world. How could I resist them all by myself? I thought that my words had angered him, but unexpectedly, just as he was about to reach me, he suddenly stopped. His expression returned to normal, and he said coolly, "When I was discussing with Wang Can's father, we also considered this matter. According to our speculations, as long as we gather the 9 Cauldron clans, we will be able to find a way to reseal the demon race." His words reminded me of what Wang Can's father had said in the cave. He had indeed mentioned that Wang Can would go with Nangong to gather the 9 Cauldron clans. From what I could see, he wasn't just trying to brush me off. If that was the case, why didn't he tell me earlier? Why did he argue with me for so long? Having reached this point in my train of thought, I voiced my doubts. I wanted to hear Nangong's explanation. After listening to me, he told me that the 9 Cauldron clans weren't just related to the sealing of the demon race, but that he had also discovered some things that had happened in the past. Nangong's words made me recall what Uncle Lin had said to me in the Medicine King's Valley. At that time, I thought that he had found the origin of the ancient war. Could it be that Nangong had the same thoughts as well? Just as I was about to ask him about it, Nangong waved his hand, indicating that I shouldn't pursue the matter any further. It was still too early to think about it. Moreover, he had only discovered some vague things, so he couldn't determine whether it was true or not. His words confirmed my suspicions. Since he had said so, I didn't dwell on it any further. It seemed that he had a way to deal with it. I didn't need to risk the world to stop the opening of the mountain and sea realm. Nangong would take care of the rest. I couldn't help but admire him for his steadiness. I had been too impatient before. However, since he had mentioned that the 9 Cauldron clans would have a way to deal with it, he would need the help of the 9 cauldrons. With that in mind, I took out the 9 cauldrons from my Xianglu pouch and handed them to Nangong. They had been lying around for many years, but now it was time to put them to good use. When he saw my action, he was surprised at first, but he immediately reacted and put the 9 cauldrons away. Then, he told me that I didn't have much time left, and that I should hurry up and cultivate. That was natural. At the moment, the Xian, Taoist, and Buddhist sects were searching for me in the outside world, and I had nowhere to go. Moreover, the mountain and sea realm would open soon, so staying in Wanwu paradise to cultivate was the only way. While we were talking, Wang Qin returned. However, he didn't seem to want to take the Pangu axe with him, which was a safe move. He walked forward and cupped his hands to me, then bowed to Nangong. Wang Qin has handed over the clan's affairs to you. We can set out now. Nangong nodded slightly, then stood up and said goodbye to me, then prepared to leave. However, I suddenly thought of something and wanted to ask Nangong about the specific date of the opening of the mountain and sea realm. When he heard my question, he stopped and turned around. In 1 month, the Magi will gather in Medicine King's Valley. What he meant was that I should meet them in Medicine King's Valley in 1 month. In that case, the opening of the mountain and sea realm would be within 1 or 2 months. From the looks of it, I was pressed for time. However, when Nangong mentioned Medicine King's Valley, I thought of something else. Back when I was cultivating the transformation of Taoist Qi, I sensed fluctuations of Taoist Qi in the cave of Medicine King's Valley. Later, I realized that Nangong had deliberately brought someone there. However, I couldn't figure out why he would choose to join hands with someone who cultivated Taoist Qi. With that thought in mind, I blurted out my question before Nangong left. After listening to my question, he seemed a little surprised. It seemed he hadn't expected that I would notice it. However, since things had come to this, he didn't hide it. He only said 2 words, Mount Lao. Mount Lao? What does this have to do with Mount Lao? After thinking about it carefully, I realized that when I returned the Eastern Emperor Bell to Mount Lao, the sect master of Mount Lao had met with misfortune. At that time, I sensed Nangong's aura. After some analysis, I guessed that Nangong had reached some kind of agreement with the sect master of Mount Lao. Otherwise, why would the sect master of Mount Lao be willing to die? Now that Nangong mentioned it again, I guessed that the person Nangong had brought to the cave was the sect master of Mount Lao. However, what made me curious was that the evil spirit and I had clearly found Nangong's aura in the sect leader's ashes. This meant that the Lao Mountain sect leader's body had been destroyed. Could it be that he had found a new body? After thinking about it, it wasn't impossible. Since Nangong had reached some kind of agreement with him, he wouldn't die easily. It seemed Nangong still had some hidden cards. While I was thinking, Nangong had left with Wang Qin. I was the only one left in the hall. If I wanted to know more, I would have to wait until the next time we met. It was born to stay in this place. I thought I shouldn't delay any longer, so I decided to go to Officer Wang's father's mansion to cultivate. A moment later, I arrived. As soon as I stood still, I sensed Mitai's aura. His innate talent wasn't bad, and his cultivation base was close to the middle stage of the seal realm. At this moment, there were all kinds of rations placed at the entrance of the palace. Apparently, Wang Qin had prepared them for Mitai. After a quick glance, I didn't mind it and directly walked into the palace. The palace was spacious and didn't have any decorations. I guess Mitai was afraid that the airflow he created during his cultivation would damage the furnishings in the room. That was why he had asked people to move the items out of the palace. It seemed Mitai didn't abuse my identity to bully people here. I was satisfied with that. With that thought in mind, I walked around the main hall and went to the room in the back. As soon as I entered the room, I saw a barrier of magic energy in front of me. I didn't break the barrier and walk in. I just stood there and called Mitai's name. After calling me a few times, the barrier in front of me disappeared. Mitai walked out of the room. When he saw me, he looked happy. He hurried to me and kowtowed to me. Master, I was glad to see his cultivation base. I asked him to get up and talk to me. After he got my order, he invited me into the room to talk to me. During our conversation, I learned that after he had reached the late stage of the glorious era, he found that he lacked a cultivation technique for fighting. He wanted to ask Wang Qin for a cultivation technique, but he didn't know how to ask him. Just as he was feeling uncertain, he met a child named Mo. He was the same as Mitai. He was alone in this place, and after a while, the two of them became friends despite their age difference. Later, when Amo learned that Mitai was my disciple, they became even closer. During one of their conversations, Mitai had unintentionally mentioned cultivation techniques, and IMO had actually indicated that she could teach Mitai some sword techniques. The two of them had become one, so Mitai didn't refuse. After learning the sword techniques that IMO had taught him, Mitai's cultivation base advanced by leaps and bounds. Within a few months, he had become a seal heavenly master. Chapter 862. From what Nangong said earlier, I roughly understood that the mountain and sea realm would most likely only have 1 or 2 months left. It would be almost impossible to increase my cultivation base by a large margin within a month. When I became a young God Celestial Master, I thought that with my young God cultivation base, I could not say that I stood at the peak of the cultivation world, but at least I had the right to speak in the cultivation world. However, from his recent experiences, he had been looking at the sky from the bottom of a well. For the time being, not to mention the human cultivators, just the number of young God Celestial Masters in the Demon Clan is enough to make me speechless. Especially the Lu clan, which I saw earlier, had a rushing Serpent King. This is something that I had not anticipated. If the Demon Clan in the human realm had such a cultivation base, then what about the Demon Clan in the mountain and sea realm? I am afraid they would only be stronger. Of course, this is only a guess, but the possibility is very high. I cannot be careless at this time. Based on the current situation, when the war between the human and demon races breaks out, if Nangong cannot find a way to resolve it, then the outcome will not be decided. If the Demon Clan takes the initiative, then I am afraid that when the time comes, it will be a catastrophe. So right now, my sense of crisis is very strong, and I really want to increase my cultivation base to the next level in a short period of time. However, cultivation, like most things in the world, cannot be accomplished in a single step unless there's a great opportunity. Of course, even if there is an opportunity, wanting to advance from young God to rushing Serpent King in a short period of time is nothing more than a pipe dream. I do not dare to have such thoughts. I just want to increase my cultivation base a little bit. So when I heard what Mitai said just now, I was very happy. The Sword Dao has always been known for its high combat power. If Mitai can gain enlightenment from the Sword Dao, then perhaps I can too. Even if I cannot increase my cultivation base, at least I can increase my combat power. When Mo's master, Taoist Huangzhu, entrusted his son to me, he passed on the Sword Dao to me. But all these years, I have only studied the sword-swallowing incantation and swallowed the Xianyuan sword into my body to nourish it. As for the other sword techniques, they are as obscure and difficult to understand as the heavenly book, and I have been unable to learn them. As for the method to nourish the Xianyuan sword, Taoist Huangzhu said that if I nourish the Xianyuan sword for a few years, my cultivation base will advance by leaps and bounds. But now that several years have passed, this sword-nurturing art, other than being able to nurture sword chi to defend against enemies, did not increase his cultivation as quickly as he had said. He did not know what had happened. Not only that, although the power of the Xianyuan sword's nurturing technique is indeed extraordinary, every time I use it, I have to use up all of its previous nurturing power, and I have to start all over again. It would be fine if I only use it once in a while, but in the past, I've encountered many powerful enemies, and the effectiveness of this sword-nurturing technique has been greatly reduced. If I can only wait until the gate of the mountain opens and the demon invaders come, then the realm, as I predicted, the demon cultivators will be invade, the demons will be invade. The battles will become even more, and the sword techniques will become less effective. Realistically, I will be able to become more powerful. Old Taoist Huang Zhu had already passed away, so it was naturally impossible to ask him these questions. However, little Amo was born with a sword embryo, and his understanding of the sword cultivation method was also very good. If he could receive his guidance and find a suitable sword technique, he would be able to raise his strength in a short period of time. With that in mind, I gestured for me, Tai, to bring me to look for Amo. After following him for a quarter of an hour, we reached Mo's residence. When I arrived, I immediately sensed Mo's aura. Back then, this little guy had not even reached the acupoint ceiling stage. Unexpectedly, After a few years of secluded cultivation, he had already reached the initial stage of the seal stage. He was much stronger than his master back then. His innate, sword embryo constitution was indeed miraculous. Little Amo's residence was located on a cliff. It was a simple thatched house. Who would have thought that he would live in such a place forever? I had specifically told Officer Wong to take good care of Imo, so Officer Wong naturally didn't neglect my instructions. I guess that it was Mo's own request to choose this place. Back then, the two of them, master and disciple, also lived in a dilapidated temple. Perhaps in the eyes of sword cultivators, quiet and bitter cultivation was the true path of cultivation. I didn't pay much attention to the environment here, so I walked towards the thatched house. As soon as I entered the courtyard, the door creaked open, and a 15 or 16-year-old youth walked out. He looked delicate and pretty, and his figure was similar to mine. At first glance, I couldn't associate him with the kid who had argued with the fatty. Imo recognized me at first glance, but he didn't look surprised. It seemed that he had matured a lot over the years. At least, his cultivation was excellent. He quickly came out to greet me. After bowing to me, he called me senior. I was stunned when I heard him call me that. Back then, he had called me uncle. Now that he called me senior, it made me feel uncomfortable, but I also felt a little emotional. He really looks like an adult. I nodded slightly, indicating that he didn't need to stand on ceremony. Imo straightened his body and nodded at me, Tai, who was behind me. After we entered the house, Imo went to prepare tea while I lifted my head to look at the surroundings of the thatched house. The furnishings in the house were simple. Except for a few writing desks, there were few other decorations. In the inner room, there were a few tables, on which Taoist Huang Zhu's memorial tablet was enshrined. Seeing this, the scenes of the past flooded my mind. When I first arrived at Mount Wangwu and passed by the old Taoist dilapidated temple, he had fought with me. With his glorious knowledge realm cultivation base, he dared to resist my heavenly master seal's technique. Moreover, if I hadn't used the forward seal, I was afraid I wouldn't have been his opponent. Unexpectedly, time flew by, and things had changed. It had been 4 years since the old Taoist had left. I sighed and stepped into the inner room to pay my respects. While I got closer, I noticed that besides Taoist Huang Zhu's memorial tablet, there were 2 narrow memorial tablets behind it. The names of Mo's parents were engraved on them. When I left that year, I didn't tell Wang Can. However, it seemed that Wang Can had taken Mo's parents from Zhao Hao of Xuan Wonderland. Otherwise, Mo wouldn't have dared to put up the memorial tablets without their corpses. As I thought about this, I picked up a few yellow incense sticks from the table and lit them with a shake of my hands. Then, I placed the yellow incense sticks into the incense burner table and softly muttered, "Now that Mo has become an adult, I believe everyone can smile in the underworld." While I was talking, Mo returned. Seeing that I was paying my respects to his master and parents, he stood aside and waited quietly. I turned my head to look at him. He still looked depressed. This child had lived alone here. Although Wang Can had taken care of him, he must have suffered a lot over the years. After I finished praying, Mo calmed down and told me in a low voice that the tea was ready. I nodded and followed him to the outer room. After I sat down and had some tea, I smiled and thanked him for helping me Tai during this period of time. Little Mo was no longer the ignorant boy he used to be. Although he was only 10 years old, from the way he spoke and acted, his wisdom was far beyond that of his peers. So, I naturally treated him like an adult. Speaking of which, I felt a little guilty. At that time, old Taoist Huang Zhu entrusted him to me, but because I had many things to do, I just handed him over to Wang Can. After that, he stayed in Wangwu Wonderland for several years. Over the years, I didn't take care of him. Instead, I took care of my disciple and took care of him. Thinking about this, after Imo finished listening to my words, she repeatedly waved her hand and said with a smile, "Senior, please don't be like this." These years, I didn't have any other friends in Wangwu Heaven's Cave. To be able to get to know me Tai is my fortune. As friends, it's only right for us to help each other out. Just like before, his words were mature and steady, which didn't seem like the mind of a 15 or 16-year-old boy. I sighed and didn't mention it again. I simply went straight to the point and told him why I'd come. After listening, IMO looked slightly surprised, but he didn't show it. He nodded and immediately asked me if I could let him have a look at the handwritten letter that his master had given me. Of course, there was no problem. Although the handwritten letter was left to me by old Taoist Huang Zhu, combined with the previous words of entrusting his son, old Taoist Huang Zhu obviously wanted me to study the handwritten letter and then teach the sword cultivation method in it to IMO. However, old Taoist Huang Zhu probably didn't expect that I didn't understand the sword cultivation method in the handwritten letter. Instead, I needed IMO to study it and then solve my doubts. I took out the handwritten letter from Xiang Lu's pouch and handed it to IMO. Suddenly, I was worried. IMO was indeed a natural sword embryo, but the sword cultivation method in this handwritten letter was really obscure and difficult. I didn't doubt that IMO could study it, but time was a big problem. If he needed a few months to study and comprehend it, it would be too late. After IMO received the handwritten letter, he immediately flipped through it. After he had basically read through the entire handwritten letter, I was about to ask him about it when IMO spoke first. He said to me, "The sword cultivation method in this handwritten letter is extremely profound. If it was 2 years ago when I read this handwritten letter, it would be like reading a heavenly book. However, in the past 2 years, the sword embryo in my body has awakened. Although I still can't completely comprehend it, I can roughly understand 70 to 80% of it." Hearing his words, I was immediately overjoyed. With his steady personality, he probably wasn't speaking carelessly. While I was overjoyed, I prepared to ask about the contents of the handwritten letter. However, when the words were on the tip of my tongue, I felt slightly awkward. After all, I was Mo's elder and the person that old Taoist Huang Zhu entrusted his son to. Now, I was asking to teach Mo. What was this? Chapter 863. I didn't know if Mo was telling the truth or not. However, I didn't care if Taoist Huang Zhu had told me that or not. At this moment, I found a way out of this awkward situation. I smiled and didn't think about it anymore. I told Mo, "We shouldn't delay this matter. I can't stay here for a long time." Hearing my words, Mo's expression became solemn. She nodded and brought me to the courtyard to sit down. She took out the letter and prepared to explain it to me. But before he could speak, I waved my hand and called Tai over. After all, this letter was a secret technique of Mo's sect, so it wasn't convenient for Tai to hear it. Thus, I pondered for a while. When Tai came before me, I took out the armor-stripping sword from Xiang Lu's pouch and handed it over to him. With a solemn expression, I said, "This sword is called armor-stripping. Although it doesn't look impressive, its power is extraordinary. Since you've already learned the way of the sword, you'll need a suitable weapon to keep you by your side. I'll give this sword to you. I hope you'll cultivate well and don't bear this sword." Then, I emphasized the existence of Senior Armor Stripping Sword. I told Tai that Senior Armor Stripping Sword was the sword spirit of the Armor Stripping Sword, and that he had to revere him. If he came across something he didn't understand, he should humbly ask for guidance from Senior. Previously, when I heard Tai say that he had received Mo's teachings in swordsmanship, I was considering whether I should pass the armor stripping sword to him. After all, although Tai had learned swordsmanship, he did not have a sharp weapon with him, so he could not use his full strength when fighting with others. Although the armor dismantling sword is extraordinary, it is still an ordinary sword. Its power is far inferior to the Xianyuan sword in my body. Moreover, based on my current strength, the armor dismantling sword is of little use to me. Instead of keeping it by my side, I might as well give it to Tai to make up for not teaching him all these years. When Tai heard this, he felt extremely flattered. He quickly knelt on the ground and respectfully accepted the sword. He said solemnly, "Disciple will obey Master's orders and will not disappoint Master's expectations." I nodded slightly and told him to find a secluded place to cultivate in peace. After receiving the order, Tai left the place. After he left, I pondered for a moment before summoning the spirit snake. After the spirit snake came out, its face was calm. It looked around and gave IMO a slight nod. Then it asked, "What's the matter?" Previously, every time he was summoned, this fellow would either look as if he had not woken up from his slumber, or he would have a cheeky smile on his face. However, his current demeanor was completely different from before. It seemed that after the incident with Hui Hui, the snake spirit's temperament had also changed greatly. I sighed and told him that not only was the Wangwu heavenly abode rich in spiritual energy, but it also had 4 true dragon veins, which were extremely good for him to recover from his injuries and increase his strength. I will be staying here for a month so that he can make the best use of the time to cultivate. After listening to me, the spirit snake nodded and didn't say anything. Then it turned around and flew away. After he left, I felt quite emotional. The word growth was related to nothing more than one's experience. The things that had happened recently might not be a bad thing for the snake spirit. After the snake spirit left, IMO, and I started to study the sword cultivation method in the handbook. Before we started, IMO asked me if I had already nurtured the sword. I naturally understood what he meant. Before Taoist Huang Zhu died, he told me that the key to this sword cultivation method was to nurture the sword with the person and nurture the person with the sword. He also said that if I nurtured the sword according to his sword technique, it wouldn't take long for my strength to increase greatly. After that, I indeed learned the sword swallowing technique and nurtured the Xianyuan sword in my spare time. However, apart from being able to use the Xianyuan sword's power to intimidate the opponent during a fight, my cultivation base didn't increase at all. Previously, when I heard Tai's story, I was puzzled. Now that IMO mentioned the matter of nurturing the sword, I naturally told him the details and also told him all the doubts in my heart. After listening to me, IMO frowned, as if he didn't know the reason for the time being. I wasn't anxious and just waited quietly. After about 15 minutes, IMO seemed to have thought of something and looked at me thoughtfully. He said, "I remember that Master once told me that the method of nurturing the sword differs from person to person. To be more precise, it should be related to the cultivator's bloodline talent. Elder, perhaps you should look for the reason from the bloodline talent." As expected of a natural sword embryo, I hadn't considered such a theory before. From what he said, he seemed to be quite insightful. I started to ponder. Logically speaking, when I was pressing my acupuncture points, I had the top 4 meridians. Moreover, when I was at glorious consciousness, I had all 5 elements. My cultivation talent was extremely good, so this change obviously wasn't due to my talent. In that case, the Xianyuan sword was most likely affected by the power of the bloodline. Apart from that, I also heard that most sword cultivators cultivate a single cultivation method, and that they are one with the sword to achieve the highest realm. Moreover, I cultivate the path of witchcraft and have learned many techniques from the Death Scripture. My aura is extremely chaotic, with all sorts of techniques on me. Perhaps this affected the effect of nurturing the sword. With that thought in mind, I communicated with IMO to ask if my guess was correct. IMO pondered for a moment before shaking his head. "I don't think so. Everyone can cultivate the sword cultivation method. I've never heard of anyone being unable to cultivate the sword. The only difference is the speed of cultivation. Elder has already taken the first step in cultivating the sword swallowing incantation. As for the following sword arts, even if Elder's bloodline is affected, I believe that as long as you understand the essence of the sword arts, it shouldn't be difficult for you to grasp 50 to 60% of it within a month." After hearing what he said, my mind regained some clarity. It made sense. If the chaotic aura affected the cultivation of the sword, I wouldn't be able to cultivate any sword cultivation method in my current situation, nor would I be able to cultivate the sword swallowing incantation so easily. Thinking about that, I didn't dwell on this matter anymore. I nodded and gestured for IMO to begin. "I came here today to seek the sword cultivation method. No matter what, I should cultivate it first. Even if I didn't manage to cultivate it, it would just be a last-minute failure." IMO didn't say anything more. After thinking for a moment, he got me to take out the sword that was nurtured in my body. I would need to use it along with the sword arts later. He would naturally be in charge of the sword cultivation method. Hearing that, I nodded and spat out the Xian Yuan sword from my mouth. The moment the Xian Yuan sword appeared, Mo's face revealed a look of surprise. I found it strange. When I opened the Xian Yuan sword box, he had witnessed the true appearance of the Xian Yuan sword with me. At that time, he didn't look so surprised. Why did it look like this now? Before I could ask, Mo asked, "This king's sword, why is it completely different from before?" Different? I was confused. The Xian Yuan sword had been with me for many years, but I didn't notice any changes. What did Mo mean by that? He was born with a sword embryo and had an extraordinary understanding of the way of the sword, and even the sword itself. Although the Xian Yuan sword was an ancient divine weapon, it was still a sword. Since Mo had said this, it was obvious that he had sensed something. I hurriedly asked Mo what he had discovered, but he didn't reply immediately. Instead, he took the Xian Yuan sword from my hand and placed it on his legs. Then, he closed his eyes as though he was sensing something. After a moment, Mo sat motionlessly. The Xian Yuan sword suddenly gave off a golden light. The golden light was so intense that it hurt my eyes. I didn't dare to look at it directly. After a few seconds, a brilliant aura appeared in the golden light, causing my entire body to tremble. I felt that this situation was familiar. After thinking for a moment, I remembered that the first time I opened the Xian Yuan sword box, the same situation had happened. However, I had nurtured the Xian Yuan sword for many years and hadn't drawn out this aura. Why did the aura appear again when Mo had just touched it? Was a natural sword embryo body so magical? As he pondered, the brilliant and dignified power only lasted for a few seconds before suddenly disappearing. The golden light from before also disappeared, and Mo opened her eyes. At this moment, she was looking at the Xian Yuan sword with a burning gaze, and joy could be seen between her brows. Everything happened very quickly just now. After I came back to my senses, I took a closer look at Mo. Only then did I realize that his cultivation had improved quite a bit compared to before. When I saw him previously, he was only at the initial stage of the seal realm. Now, his cultivation had reached the middle stage of the seal realm. In reality, this wasn't the first time that Mo had used the Xian Yuan sword to increase his cultivation. The last time the Xian Yuan sword box had been opened, the golden light had landed on Mo's body, allowing him to jump from the peak of the dragon-seeking realm to the pressure point realm. Moreover, he had activated his 4 meridians. If that was the case, then the same thing had happened. Or Mo had grasped some kind of function of the Xian Yuan sword. If he had discovered the magical function of a Xian Yuan sword, then it seemed that he could use it on me too. If that was the case, the rapid increase in cultivation in a short period of time wasn't just a fantasy. My heart couldn't help but throb as I hurriedly asked Mo what had happened. Mo took a deep breath and calmed his aura before saying to me, "Previously, I used a sword cultivation technique to combine my consciousness with the king's sword, which resulted in the strange phenomenon just now. Based on my guess, to activate the power of the king's sword, I need to achieve unity of mind. In other words, I need to use my mind to control the king's sword, just like this." As he said that, he placed the Xian Yuan sword at the side and closed his eyes again. In a flash, the Xian Yuan sword actually flew out on its own. After circling a few times in the air, a sword aura slashed towards the ground. With a loud rumble, the ground shook violently. Where the sword aura landed, there was a gap of a few meters. I couldn't help but be shocked. Even though the power of this attack couldn't compare to the sword aura and Dao aura that I had used, it was enough to make me gasp in surprise. After all, Mo's cultivation was only at the middle stage of the seal realm, and he had just advanced. For him to be able to use such an attack was simply unbelievable. If I could also grasp the unity of mind, I could use the Xian Yuan sword with my mind. Under my control, the power of the Xian Yuan sword would only be greater. Just now, I also noticed that Mo didn't use much Dao aura. It wasn't like before where every time I used the Xian Yuan sword, I would almost use up all of my Dao aura. Chapter 864. When the Tao of sword cultivation was cultivated to completion, even ghosts and gods would be shocked. Thus, Mo's statement that it could destroy the heavens and earth wasn't an exaggeration. As for what he said earlier, it wasn't hard to understand. His so-called unity of mind and heart wasn't a clear sword technique, but a comprehension of the Tao of sword. Thus, he couldn't impart it to me and could only let me comprehend it on my own. Since I was comprehending the Tao on my own, even if Mo could give me pointers on the key points, I reckoned that the process wouldn't be short. I only had a month's time. It would be best if there were results during this period of time. If there weren't any results, then all my previous efforts would be wasted. With that thought, I was still slightly unwilling. After some thought, I asked Mo if there was a shortcut. Once I said that, I couldn't help but smile bitterly. There weren't any shortcuts on the path of cultivation. Even if there were, they would be inferior methods. Even if my cultivation improved, my Tao foundation wouldn't be stable. With my cultivation, I shouldn't have said such words, but my state of mind was slightly unstable. Who knew that after Mo heard my question, he actually smiled and nodded. There is naturally a shortcut. It's to forcefully practice this sword cultivation method. Practicing this method can increase seniors' comprehension of the sword. When the time comes, you will be able to become one with the king's sword. Cultivating all the Tao of sword will be a shortcut. This brat actually started to preach to me. It was a shortcut to the mountain of books. His words implied that there was a shortcut, but in actual fact, he was reminding me that there was no shortcut. I smiled and didn't say anything more. I took the handbook and indicated to Mo that we should start now. Seeing my action, Mo naturally didn't say anything more. He sat cross-legged beside me and started to explain the records in the handbook to me. There was no seniority in learning, and the one who had attained it was the teacher. At this moment, I couldn't care about the other details. As I listened to Mo's explanation attentively, I started to practice over and over again. I sat like this for half a month. In this half a month, Mo, and I didn't slack off at all. With his careful pointers and my diligent cultivation, I had comprehended 50 to 60% of the Tao of sword cultivation in the handbook. I'm not very satisfied with this. In the past, when I practiced other cultivation methods, I spent so much effort to completely comprehend them. However, I do not dare to say that I can completely master this sword cultivation method within a month. However, according to Mo, this sword cultivation technique is different from other cultivation techniques. It takes a lot of time to extract the essence from it. My current state is already very frightening. Other than that, Mo also told me that he had already explained all the sword cultivation methods in the handbook to me. Now, I only needed to continue practicing diligently, and I would be able to master them. Since he had said so, I didn't belittle myself. I got up and bid him farewell. Now that I've roughly grasped this method and it's working, there's no need for me to delay any longer. I'd better go back to Wang Can's father's mansion and continue to practice my swordsmanship. At the same time, I can improve my witchcraft cultivation. Seeing that I had made up my mind, Mo didn't try to persuade me to stay and handed me the letter. I didn't immediately take the letter, but I had a thought in my mind. Taoist Huang Zhu had said that with Mo's physique, he didn't need any cultivation method to help him. However, this letter was something that Taoist Huang Zhu always carried with him. Moreover, it was an inherited technique of his sect. Since I had already learned the method, this letter was useless to me. It would be better to give it to Mo so that he would have something to remember. With this thought in mind, I gestured to Mo to keep the letter with me. Although Mo was young, he was very intelligent. He understood my intention and didn't refuse. He nodded and put the letter away. Before leaving, I thought that Mo would go with me to the Medicine King Valley to meet with the sorcerer tribe in half a month. I thought that since he had become a heavenly seal master in 2 years, it wouldn't take him long to reach the sun god realm. If I could bring him with me, when the mountain and sea realm opened, he would be able to help the human race. However, after thinking it over, I gave up on this idea. First, after the mountain and sea realm opened, the situation would change rapidly. With Mo's cultivation base as a heavenly seal master, he wouldn't be able to resist the monster race's army. Second, out of selfishness, I hadn't taken good care of him all these years. I felt that I had let down Taoist Huangzhu. Since danger was coming, I couldn't just throw him into the fire. Therefore, I didn't say anything. I said goodbye to IMO and returned to Wang Can's father's mansion. At this time, Mitai's aura wasn't in the hall. He must have gone to cultivate the sword path. I didn't care and went into the inner room. With a wave of my hand, I used my shaman energy to cover the entire palace with a barrier. Then, I sat down cross-legged and began to adjust my breathing. Half a month passed. During this time, I didn't stay in the palace. I went to the river under the cliff to absorb the aura of the true dragon to increase my Tao energy. The cultivation base of the sorcerer Tao had to be balanced. If there was any mistake, the Tao foundation would be unstable and the cultivation speed would be greatly reduced. I had only realized this recently. It was no wonder that after I became Celestial Seal Master, my cultivation speed was far slower than before. It was even slower than Mitai, Han Wunan, and the others. However, even if my cultivation speed wasn't fast, I had raised my realm to the late stage of Yang Spirit through the swordsmanship taught by Mo. I was only one step away from the perfection. Not only that, I had also comprehended many kinds of swordsmanship from the swordsmanship. However, I hadn't made any progress in integrating with the Xianyuan sword. Now that the 1-month period with Nangong was up, the top priority was to rush to the Medicine King Valley to meet with the Wu tribe. I had to put aside my cultivation for the time being. After walking out of the palace, I spread my soul sense, trying to find the location of the snake's spirit. Since my cultivation had improved, my physical strength, Yang spirit strength, and even my soul sense had made a qualitative leap. Although I couldn't cross the Yang spirit realm in one step, with my current means, I could even fight against people at the middle stage of the Yang spirit realm. All of this was naturally due to the swordsmanship taught by Mo. After a while, I found the location of the snake's spirit. When I arrived, I saw that he was sitting on a mountain stream, his body wrapped in a golden barrier. Previously, I hadn't noticed any changes in his aura when I was far away. But now, I could tell that the closer I got to him, the more I could feel the oppressive aura coming from the snake's spirit. His cultivation was far below mine, so this oppressive aura couldn't affect me. However, I was sure that no one under the Yang spirit realm would dare to come within 100 meters of him. I didn't know how long he had been in this state. I didn't want to disturb him, but the appointed time with Nangong had arrived. The opening of the mountain and sea realm was more important, so I couldn't stay here for too long. Thinking of this, I gently called the snake's spirit. There was no response, so I continued to call him a few more times. After a while, the golden barrier around the snake's spirit disappeared, and his eyes suddenly opened. I could clearly see a few strands of golden light twining in his pupils. Before I could react, he closed his eyes again. His body twisted, and he transformed into a real dragon. Then, he flew up into the sky. However, he didn't fly far. Instead, he coiled above my head, occasionally letting out a deafening dragon roar. Judging from the previous signs, the snake spirit's cultivation base had increased a lot. Not only that, but I vaguely sensed that something seemed to have grown out from the protruding part of the snake spirit's back. When I took a closer look, I saw that a pair of small wings had grown out of its back. At first glance, it wasn't easy to see its existence, but it looked somewhat humorous. However, after seeing this, I was pleasantly surprised. As far as I knew, the rain dragon had a pair of huge wings on its back. When the snake spirit had evolved into a real dragon, he had also mentioned this. At this moment, the pair of wings had already taken shape. It seemed it wouldn't take long for the snake spirit to successfully transform into a rain dragon and fly between heaven and earth. After collecting my thoughts, I loudly called the snake spirit. We must leave this place immediately. We can't delay any longer. After listening to me, the spirit snake twisted its body and transformed into its human form, landing in front of me. However, he didn't seem excited about his cultivation base increasing. Instead, he looked disappointed. I didn't know why he was like this, so I quickly asked him. Unexpectedly, the snake spirit asked me, Did Hui Hui die because of me? Hearing this, I was stunned at first. Then, I realized that the snake's spirit must have noticed something. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken the initiative to mention Hui Hui. In that case, I didn't hide it anymore and nodded slightly. Although the snake's spirit had realized that this matter was related to him, I still had some doubts. I didn't know how he had noticed it. Without waiting for me to ask, the snake's spirit muttered to itself, "No wonder my strength has improved so much in the past month. It turns out that Hui Hui returned the blood essence to me. Now, I finally understand why she said that she would live as long as I was alive." Then, he looked a little depressed. He shook his head with a bitter smile on his face. Seeing him like this, I didn't know how to comfort him, so I simply didn't respond to his words and let him adjust himself. However, what he said just now made me ponder something in my heart. In this case, the snake spirit had been able to improve from the early stage of Yang God to the late stage of Yang God in the past month, all because of the drop of blood essence that Hui Hui had returned. In other words, before this, the snake spirit's cultivation speed had been limited by the lack of blood essence. If not for this, I'm afraid that he would have advanced to the Yang God Celestial Master a few years ago. Then, everything would have changed after that. In this case, he was the same as me. Everything was destined. Thinking of this, I patted the snake spirit's shoulder and told him that our fates weren't in our control. Hui Hui's matter would eventually come to an end. It was just a matter of time. Don't be too sad. Chapter 865. When I left Wangwu Grotto Heaven, Ah Fu sent me outside. Wonkin had left with Nangong and hadn't returned yet. As the 1-month deadline Nangong had mentioned was approaching, it was clear that Wonkin had gone with him to Medicine King Valley. Ah Fu knew that I was leaving to meet up with Wong Can and the others. When we were outside Wangwu Grotto Heaven, he suddenly asked me to bring a message to Wong Can. He said that if Wong Can was in trouble, he must inform him. At that time, he would bring everyone in Wangwu Grotto Heaven to help. Although he wasn't a member of the witch tribe, he knew something about what had happened recently. Therefore, it was inevitable that he was worried about Wong Can. After all, there were so many people in Wangwu Grotto Heaven, and they all relied on Wong Can as their backbone. If something happened to Wong Can, the 1,000-year inheritance of Wangwu Grotto Heaven would come to an end. It was normal for Ah Fu to worry. However, Ah Fu didn't know the truth. If something went wrong during the opening of the mountain and sea realm, it wouldn't just be Wangwu Grotto Heaven's problem. I was afraid the whole world would be in turmoil. How could Wangwu Grotto Heaven stay out of this? Although I was thinking about this, I still nodded. Then, I said goodbye to Ah Fu and flew away from Mount Wangwu. It was the next day when I returned to Medicine King Valley. As soon as I arrived, I felt that the aura of the Medicine King Valley was much stronger than before. After a while, I found that in addition to the weak aura of the witch tribe in the Medicine King Valley, there were several more auras of the Seal Heavenly Masters. Obviously, the other members of the witch tribe had arrived here before me. I didn't waste any more time and flew in the direction of the village. From a distance, I saw many figures standing in the open space in front of the village. The leader was Nangong. At this time, he was standing with his hands clasped behind his back, looking in my direction. The people behind him were doing the same. When I came in front of him, Nangong looked at me carefully. Then, he smiled and nodded at me. "Not bad. Your cultivation is close to the consummate Yang spirit realm." I did not know just how high Nangong's level of cultivation was, but he had a lot of secrets about him. It was only normal for him to be able to tell my level of cultivation at first glance. That was why I was not bothered by it. I only nodded lightly as a reply, then turned to look at the shamans behind him. I glanced around. Apart from the people of Medicine King Valley, the Fatty, Wong Can, and the others, there were more than 10 people from the witch tribe that I had never seen before. Their cultivation levels were all above the seal. When I looked at them, they also looked at me with burning gazes. At this moment, Nangong walked over and led me to the front of the crowd. He said in a clear voice, "Everyone, this is the saint that the ancestor had prophesied to lead our clan back to prosperity." It was obvious that everyone already knew my identity. The moment he finished speaking, they all knelt down in unison and shouted, "Greetings, Saint." Even the fatty did the same. It's not the first time I've experienced this, but it's different from the past. These people in front of me are all the descendants of the wizard tribe in the human world. Even though I had prepared myself beforehand, I was still rather excited at the sight before me. I wasn't a member of the wizard tribe, but I knew how difficult it was for the wizard tribe's bloodline to survive for thousands of years. I was deeply moved, so I warmly encouraged them. Wang Can, the fatty, and the others were fine, but the people who had come with Nan Gong seemed to know that the revival of the wizard tribe was right in front of them. They were all very excited, and some of them even had tears in their eyes. After I comforted them for a while, they gradually calmed down. After talking for a while, they followed by laying back to the meeting hall. In Nan Gong's words, the opening of the mountain and sea realm was a blessing for the wizard tribe. Since everyone present was a member of the wizard tribe, they naturally had to participate in the discussion. As for the leaders, they were naturally Nan Gong and the Nine Cauldrons clan. I didn't know what Nan Gong's plan was for gathering the wizard tribe, so I didn't say anything. I just sat on a high seat and listened, playing the role of a mascot. After some small talk, there was finally some substantive content. However, it was only about the wizard tribe after the opening of the mountain and sea realm. There was nothing wrong with the arrangement of the wizard tribe. After all, the mortal world was different from the shaman Dao. Furthermore, the people with Dao Qi were very powerful. After the mountain and sea realm was settled, they would inevitably attack the wizard tribe. Considering Nan Gong's personality, it was reasonable for him to make arrangements for the wizard tribe. However, I was more concerned about how to solve the problem of the demon tribe after the opening of the mountain and sea realm. Seeing that Nan Gong hadn't brought up the topic, I wanted to talk about it. However, Nan Gong seemed to have sensed my intention. When I opened my mouth, he interrupted me. After a while, he moved closer to me and said in a low voice, "This is the time to boost the morale of our people. As for the demon tribe, I already have a plan. There's no need to worry. Besides, our people can't do anything about it. There's no need to discuss it." His words were reasonable. If the demon tribe really did wreak havoc, the dozens of wizard tribe members present wouldn't be able to do anything. After thinking about it for a while, I nodded and didn't mention it again. After the meeting was over, I pulled Wang Can to the side and told him what Ah Fu had told me. Compared to Ah Fu, Wang Can knew about the opening of the mountain and sea realm. After hearing Ah Fu's words, he nodded and didn't say anything. After talking to Wang Can, I planned to find the fatty, but I didn't see him. I suddenly thought of Wu Yu and his wife. Today, I returned to the Medicine King Valley, but the two of them didn't show up. It was strange. Although they weren't wizard tribe members, I had brought a lot of people with me when I returned. There was no reason for them not to hear the commotion. With that in mind, I walked to Wu Yu's room and gently knocked on the door. The door opened, and Lu Ruxu appeared. When he saw me, he looked happy. However, I could see a trace of worry on his face. I didn't know what was going on. Lu Ruxu bowed to me and invited me into the room. After entering the room, I didn't see Wu Yu except for Lu Ruxu. I thought it was strange, so I casually mentioned it. Unexpectedly, when Lu Ruxu saw me asking about Wu Yu, he looked even more worried. He cupped his hands to me and said, "A few days ago, Wu Yu left this place." I frowned. It wasn't easy for them to reunite. Why did Wu Yu leave Lu Ruxu in less than a month? Lu Ruxu didn't wait for me to ask. A few days ago, Bai Ling came to tell Wu Yu that she should go to the Qiyu tomb to find the Fushi zither. She said that it was very important to me, and she could only go there alone. After listening to this, I understood the reason. I guessed that Nan Gong was the mastermind behind this. I could also guess his intention. Wu Yu was the soul of the Fushi zither. In order to defeat the Taoist of Mount Longhu, he had to cut off his connection with the Fushi zither. He had almost died at that time. The Taoist of Mount Longhu with the Fushi zither had been trapped in the Qiyu tomb. The Taoist from Mount Longhu had also asked about it. From his words, it wasn't hard to understand that they couldn't open the Qiyu tomb. That Taoist's fate was still unknown. Now that the mountain and sea realm was about to open, someone needed to control the Fushi zither. Without a doubt, Wu Yu was the best candidate. Moreover, Nangong had said that as long as he controlled the 10 divine tools, he would have the initiative to open the mountain and sea realm. However, the divine tools all had spirituality and could automatically recognize their masters. Although Nangong wanted to gather them, he didn't have the ability to control them. Even so, if he could control a few divine tools, it would be beneficial. That was why Nangong had no choice but to do this. I thought for a while. Wu Yu was the soul of the Fushi Zither, and she was very familiar with the Chiyu tomb. Logically speaking, she shouldn't be in too much danger. I comforted Lu Ruxu, telling her not to worry too much. She trusted me. After hearing my words, she nodded. It seemed she wasn't worried about this matter anymore. After leaving Lu Ruxu's room, I met Fatty after taking a few steps. He saw me from afar and walked toward me with a smile. Seeing his complacent face, I was moved. When I left, Fatty was discussing the wedding with Bai Ling. He told me that he would inform me on the day of the wedding. Now, 1 month had passed, and I hadn't received any good news from him. From his expression, I guessed that the good news would come in a few days. Sure enough, Fatty came to me and smiled. 2 days from now, he and Bai Ling will have their wedding. I'll be their witness. When I heard the Fatty mention the wedding witness, I hurriedly waved my hand. Since ancient times, the wedding witnesses have always been elders of the clan or people of virtue and prestige. I'm about the same age as Fatty, and we're of the same generation. How can I be his witness? Unexpectedly, Fatty said, I'm the holy sage of the witch tribe, and they only follow my lead. Since I'm here, I'll be their witness. What he said made sense. I didn't want to spoil his mood, so I nodded and agreed. When Fatty heard that, he was also very happy. He told me to prepare first, as he still had many things to do. After he left, I returned to my room. I didn't stay idle. Since I was going to be the witness of Fatty and Bai Ling's wedding, I had to be careful. I had to understand the wedding procedures and the duties of a witness. I didn't want to embarrass myself. With that thought in mind, I asked the people of the Medicine King Valley to read the ancient books and report the wedding customs to me. After reading them carefully, I understood that the wedding ceremony wasn't simple at all. According to the ancient books, the etiquette was based on the alternation of yin and yang. The marriage of the two surnames was to serve the ancestral temple and to pass on to the future generations. Therefore, a gentleman valued it. Therefore, the etiquette, the name, the auspicious, the ceremony, and the date of the ceremony were all hosted by the host in the temple, and the host greeted them at the door. Entering, bowing to the host, and obeying the order of the temple. Therefore, being respectful and prudent was the etiquette. After reading it several times, I finally digested the process and understood what the witness had to do. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. Early in the morning, Uncle Lin brought the Fatty and the people of the 9 cauldrons to knock on the door. It was a necessary procedure to invite a witness. The groom would invite him, and he would sit as a guest in front of the other guests. The Fatty was wearing a scholar's uniform and looked quite spirited. I followed them to the main hall. At this moment, the main hall was filled with joy. Even the tables and chairs had been changed to mahogany. When the auspicious hour arrived, Bai Ling was escorted into the hall by the people of the Medicine King Valley. At this moment, Bai Ling was wearing a phoenix coronet and a red cape. She looked like a gentle breeze, her sleeves fluttering and her skirt swaying. However, looking at her current attire, my heart suddenly returned to the moment I had married Lao Ai in my dream after drinking the Grave Mound wine more than 10 years ago. Chapter 866. Thinking about Bayan, it was hard for me to be happy on the fat man's big day. I smiled mechanically as I finished my work as a witness. I didn't feel much joy until the wedding was over. The next morning, before the joyous atmosphere in the Medicine King Valley had dissipated, Nangong knocked on my door and told me that the clansmen were already waiting in the front hall. There was no need for him to say anything. I could guess that the mountain and sea realm would be opening in a few days. Knowing this, I didn't ask anything and followed Nangong to the front hall. The fat man and his wife had changed into regular clothes, and were also sitting in the front hall. Seeing me come, the people in the room stood up and greeted me. After I sat down, Bai Ling led the group and bowed to me. "Sage, please lead us to the mountain and sea realm to welcome our people." I had already expected this, so I wasn't surprised. However, the scene in front of me moved me, and I felt like I was guiding the world. I lifted my eyes and swept my gaze across the crowd. Everyone looked excited as they waited for my response. However, I didn't see Wu Yue. It seemed that she hadn't found the Fushi zither yet. However, since Nangong had decided to leave, he must have made preparations. I guessed that once Wu Yue got the Fushi zither, she would come looking for us. I didn't need to worry about that. Since that was the case, I called for everyone to get up and set off. Everyone responded in a loud voice and made way for him. Nangong and I walked out of the room, but just as we stepped out of the door, we saw a figure kneeling behind the door. I looked down and saw that it was Lu Ruxu. I didn't know why he was doing this, but after asking, I learned that he was worried about Wu Yue's situation. Wu Yue hadn't returned yet, and we had already set off. Once Wu Yue got the Fushi zither, she would come looking for us, so he asked me to bring him with me so that he could see Wu Yue as soon as possible. The couple had deep feelings for each other, so I naturally wouldn't refuse Lu Ruxu's request. I nodded and let Lu Ruxu return to Xiang Lu's pouch. After dealing with this matter, everyone flew out of the Medicine King Valley. However, we didn't bring all our clansmen on this trip. Everyone below the Celestial Master stayed in the Medicine King Valley, including Uncle Lin. After leaving Yawang Mountain, we took a plane to Jiaodong. According to Nangong, our destination was the Yellow Sea. When Nangong told me about this, I couldn't help but feel suspicious. Could it be that the mountain and sea realm is located in the Bohai Sea? I once asked Nangong about this, but he kept his mouth shut and told me that I would know when the time came. He had always been like that. I didn't ask further and put the matter aside. However, when I mentioned the Bohai Sea, I couldn't help but think of Mount Flowing Waves. That place had a savage aura that was very similar to the mountain and sea realm. However, I know that the mountain and sea realm has been sealed for thousands of years, and no one has been able to enter. Perhaps Billow Mountain was sealed at the same time as the mountain and sea realm. It took several hours to travel from Bashu to Jiaodong. When the plane landed, it was already noon. As soon as I got off the plane, I sensed many Taoist auras in the surroundings. Presumably, the people from the three sects had also arrived in Jiaodong. However, things are different now. We have a common goal, so we will temporarily put aside our past enmity. Moreover, the people with me have extraordinary strength, so I don't fear them. After leaving the airport, we headed to the nearest pier, intending to find a few fishing boats to go out to sea. Unexpectedly, he was stopped by someone on the way. The person was wearing a Taoist robe and only had a cultivation base of Shiryao. He told us that there was a roadblock in front of us and that we couldn't pass, so we should turn back. This person looked unfamiliar, and I had never seen him before. However, from his clothes, it was obvious that he was a cultivator from a Taoist temple. I opened the car door and walked towards him. When I was in front of him, I asked, "Where do you live?" This person was only at Shiryao, so he naturally couldn't sense my aura. Thus, his tone was somewhat irritated. It was obvious that he thought I was an ordinary person. He waved his hand at me. "This matter has nothing to do with you. The road ahead has been sealed. Leave now." Then, he ignored me and walked towards the temporary pavilion on the side of the roadblock. The Taoist and Buddhist sects were indeed the strongest powers in China to be able to create such a scene. Since that was the case, I didn't intend to be entangled with him. I signaled for everyone to get off the car and fly towards the pier. Since this place was sealed, it was obvious that no ordinary person would be here. There was no need to be wary of anything. The Taoist from before naturally noticed the commotion behind him. He turned around and looked at us with a dumbfounded expression as he watched us leave. After a while, we arrived at the pier. Unexpectedly, there wasn't a single ship here. It seemed that all the ships here had been robbed. It was a bit troublesome. It was a few hundred li away. Nangong and I were fine and could still endure it. However, the people behind us all had cultivation bases, and it was inevitable that they would be exhausted after flying for a few hundred li. Just as I was frowning, A cargo ship sailed towards the shore from the fog. The moment the ship appeared, I sensed a familiar aura. It was Han Wenan. After the ship docked, he came out of the cabin and landed in front of me. Without waiting for me to ask, he signaled for me to bring everyone to board the ship. From his appearance, it seemed that he had come to welcome us. Since that was the case, I didn't exchange pleasantries with him and boarded the ship with my clansmen. I thought that I would see the elders of the Han family here, but I didn't expect to see only Han Wenan on the ship. Han Wenan seemed to have noticed my puzzled expression and told me that the Han family had already arrived. Later on, he knew that I would also be here, so he sailed the ship alone and waited for me here. After listening to Han Wenan's words, I nodded slightly and found an empty room to rest. I didn't know how much time had passed, but Han Wenan knocked on the door. I thought that we had arrived, but he unexpectedly said that he had something to discuss with me. His calm face didn't give me any clues. I simply stopped guessing and asked him what he wanted to discuss with me. After listening to me, his face immediately became gloomy. He asked, "You should know the relationship between the 10 great divine tools and the world of immortals, right?" Of course I knew about it, but I didn't know why Han Wenan suddenly brought it up. However, after thinking about it, I realized that there was half a Niwa stone in Han Wenan's heart. Could it be that he wanted to talk to me about this? While he was thinking, Han Wenan had already taken off his shirt, pointed at the colorful stone on his chest, and said, "I only found out some time ago that this stone is the Niwa stone, one of the 10 great divine weapons. The elders of the clan told me that if I want to open the mountain and sea realm, I must gather all of the 10 great divine tools." I pondered for a long time before I understood that the Niwa stone in my body must be taken out. However, I'm afraid that when the time comes, I will really fall into the 9 underworlds. I had already guessed what Han Wenan was talking about. However, I knew that with Han Wenan's temperament, he wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice himself for the benefit of the clan. Moreover, he was the patriarch of the Han family, so he naturally had to consider the bigger picture. Since that was the case, why did he want to talk to me about this? Just as I was about to ask, Han Wenan opened his mouth and said, "I'm not afraid of sacrificing myself. The elders of the clan promised me that if someone in the clan was lucky enough to ascend, they would reconstruct my fleshly body. However, the Han family isn't the strongest in the metaphysics society, so I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to obtain such a lucky chance. In the future, if the Han family offends us in any way, I hope that Brother Zhou will give me some face and be magnanimous. I do have some grudges with the Han family. Back in the ancestral land of Mount One, the Han family's ancestors attacked me. Earlier, I predicted that after the mountain and sea realm, the people of Taoist Qi wouldn't stop hunting down the Magi. Presumably, Han Wenan had also considered this. Based on my current strength, there was no one under the Yang Spirit Ascension who could be a match for me. It was normal for Han Wenan to be worried. Han Wenan's words were the same as his last words. Although I felt bad, the mountain and sea realm was a matter of great importance, and I couldn't give up on it just because of Han Wenan. Since he had entrusted me with this task, I had no choice but to agree. Seeing that I had agreed, he squeezed out an unsightly smile, put on his clothes, and then took his leave. As I watched him leave, I sighed and opened my mouth, but didn't know what to say. A few hours later, I sensed the fluctuations of Taoist Qi in the area. From their auras, I could tell that they had cultivation bases above the seal. Presumably, we had arrived at our destination. When I opened the door, I saw Nangong coming out of his room. He stood in front of me, but didn't say anything. Instead, he motioned for me to follow him to the deck. When we reached the deck, the Magi were all there. When they saw me, they all rose to their feet. Nangong and I exchanged a glance, then led the others up into the clouds. In less than a few seconds, we landed steadily above the clouds. As soon as I landed, I noticed that the area was already crowded with people. There were many Taoist priests and monks in disguise. I hadn't had much contact with them, so I only recognized the people from Mount Longhu and Mount Lao. As for the monks, I had never seen them before. Besides them were the people from the Metaphysics Society. I looked around and saw that their leader was Yang Shilong, who I had met many times in the past. From where he stood, it seemed that he was the current president of the Metaphysics Society. Behind him were the people from the Han family, the Liu family, and the Zhang family. There were many young faces among them. It seemed that in recent years, there had been quite a few outstanding youths rising to prominence. Chapter 867. After greeting my acquaintances in the Metaphysics Society, I looked behind me. I didn't see President Li, the Master of Peng Lai, and the others. Yi Piampian and Yi Maolon were also nowhere to be seen. At this moment, there was a sudden explosion in the distance, followed by a strong gust of wind. It blew so hard that many people couldn't stand still. The clouds beneath them were also blown away. Everyone had no choice but to use the spiritual energy in their bodies to set up a barrier in front of them. Even so, many people with low cultivation were swept away by the gust of wind. After I stood still, I looked in the direction of the sound. I could faintly feel a savage aura rushing over. At this moment, Nangong, who was next to me, had a slightly gloomy expression as he muttered, "The Ascension Cultivator." When I heard this, I was startled. However, I quickly came back to my senses. Was this the Yang Spirit Ascension technique? Just this aura alone was enough to make the Celestial Masters present feel so uncomfortable. The Ascension Cultivator was indeed the strongest force in the human world. Thinking about this, I began to ponder and guess who it was. This aura didn't seem to be the method of the Master of Peng Lai. He wasn't such a high-profile person. However, this aura had a hint of ancient savage aura. It couldn't be Celestial Master Zhang or President Li. Could it be that it was a sacrificial evil spirit? While I was thinking, another sound pierced through the sky. However, this time, it was a familiar voice. "Zhou." When I heard this, my body trembled and I retreated. The person who had come was Lu Jinyang. Just as I determined his identity, Lu Jinyang was already not far away from me. At this moment, he was wearing a black robe. His originally ugly face had returned to its original appearance. However, on his angular face, there was a strange pattern. He was approaching me step by step. His eyes were filled with a strong aura of death. I never thought that I would see Lu Jinyang here again. I also didn't expect that after a few years, he had already advanced to the Yang Spirit Ascension realm. Being stared at by his angry eyes, my forehead was already sweating, and my whole body was in fear. Not only me, but everyone around me also looked terrified. The strength of the Yang Spirit Ascension realm was really terrifying. At this moment, Nangong fiercely patted my shoulder, pulling me out of my previous state. Afterwards, he whispered in my ear, "Don't fall into his mind-absorbing technique. That person's power should be at the early stages of charge. If the two of us work together, we should be able to deal with him." After hearing Nangong's words, I finally understood why I was so terrified. I had fallen for Lu Jinyang's trick. However, even though Lu Jinyang has already ascended with the methods that I have learned in Wangwu Paradise, I dare not say that I will be able to deal with a person who is ascending, but I can still protect myself. Furthermore, I have Nangong Xiang by my side, so I don't have to be afraid. Thinking to this point, I opened my mouth and spat out the Xian Yuan sword. I looked at Lu Jinyang, who was calmly walking towards me. When Lu Jinyang saw my reaction, the corners of his mouth curled up and a mocking expression appeared on his face. In the blink of an eye, a cloud of thick black gas appeared above his hands. After the ball of black qi left, it actually turned into Lu Jinyang's appearance. However, it was only an illusion and not his real body. Even so, I could still feel the enormous power that was contained in the illusion. Seeing that the illusion was about to reach me, I didn't have time to think and immediately used the sword technique of the sword cultivator with the Xian Yuan sword. In the blink of an eye, a sword aura flew out from the Xian Yuan sword to meet Lu Jinyang's black aura illusion. Unexpectedly, when the two of them collided, the black aura illusion actually dispersed, allowing the Xian Yuan sword aura to pass through it without injuring the illusion. At this moment, I was in a daze and didn't have the time to react. I only heard a light snort from the illusion before a pair of hands that were covered in black gas patted my chest. In that instant, I felt that my soul was about to leave my body. The power of the charge wasn't as simple as I had thought. Not to mention me, even Nangong Xiang, who was at the side, couldn't help me in time. When Lu Jinyang's palm imprinted on my chest, I felt that I would be severely injured even if I didn't die. However, the strange thing was that after a short while, I was still standing at my original position. On the contrary, Lu Jinyang, who was at a distance, suddenly wailed. Seeing this, I was confused. I lowered my head to sense my body. After confirming that I didn't receive any injuries, I raised my head to look at Lu Jinyang, who was convulsing on the ground. My heart was filled with bewilderment. After staying silent for a short while, I turned my head to look at Nangong Xiang. However, he had the same bewildered expression as me. It was obvious that he didn't know what had happened. Just as my heart was filled with doubt, a familiar voice came from the sky. Impudent! You dare to offend your superior? Hearing this voice, my heart slightly moved as I hastily looked towards the source of the voice. In the blink of an eye, that familiar figure appeared in front of me. It was the evil sacrificial spirit that had left for a few days. Did his words just now mean that he had neutralized Lu Jinyang's attack? While I got close, the sacrificial evil spirit still had a calm expression on his face. He nodded slightly at me and stood beside me. Then, he coldly shouted at Lu Jinyang, who was lying on the ground. Evil creature, hurry up and greet the Lord. Lord? Hearing these two words, I wasn't the only one stunned. Everyone in the surroundings who had witnessed the entire scene had a dumbfounded expression. It was obvious that the Lord that the evil sacrificial spirit was referring to was naturally me. However, I could understand if the evil sacrificial spirit had called me Lord, but why did he request Lu Jinyang in such a manner? Just as I was puzzled, the evil sacrificial spirit explained softly to me. Previously in the tomb, I spared this servant's life because I wanted him to inherit my inheritance so that he would be able to help me in the future. However, his innate talent was still lacking. Moreover, his heart wasn't righteous. Even after receiving the entire inheritance, he had only just reached the ascension realm. He could still be of some use to me, so I brought him here. I didn't think that this evil creature would be so impudent the moment he appeared. After listening to his explanation, I more or less understood. Back then, the evil sacrificial spirit had told me that he had purposely given Qi Yu's inheritance to Lu Jinyang. However, I still didn't understand what had just happened. The evil sacrificial spirit seemed to see through my confusion and continued. In the inheritance that I had left behind, there was a restriction that the monster emperor had set up. If he dared to have malicious intentions towards Lord, he would have brought about his own destruction. Previously, when the inheritance wasn't complete, it didn't reveal itself. Now that he had received the entire inheritance, the restriction took effect. I instantly understood that after Lu Jinyang had received the entire inheritance of Qi Yu, a restriction had been planted in his body. His attack just now wasn't blocked by the evil sacrificial spirit, but because of the restriction. At that moment, I looked at Lu Jinyang, who was still convulsing on the ground, and I felt pity for him. That year, when he had risked his life to obtain Qi Yu's inheritance, he had thought that I would kill him. In the end, the world was unpredictable. No matter if it was him or me, we would never have thought that the outcome would be like this. At that moment, the hatred that I had for Lu Jinyang instantly faded. After thinking for a moment, the evil sacrificial spirit was right. Keeping Lu Jinyang alive would at least be of help. As for the hatred from that year, he had killed my parents and I had also killed his grandfather. Moreover, I had also made him look like this. Between us, it could be considered that we were even. As I sighed in my heart, Lu Jinyang seemed to have recovered a little as he stood up shakily from the ground. He didn't seem to have learned his lesson as he continued to glare at me viciously. After a short moment, he actually lifted his leg and walked towards me. From his posture, it seemed that he was going to attack me again. It was a pity that after taking a step, his face distorted. It wasn't because of anger, but because of pain. From the outside, I couldn't tell how powerful the restriction in his body was. However, I could see that his entire body was trembling and swaying. He didn't have the posture of an expert of the generation, but rather, he looked like a child that was learning to walk. The power of hatred couldn't be underestimated. Even though he was in so much pain that his entire body was trembling, Lu Jinyang still roared angrily. The veins on his face bulged as he took another step forward. It was obvious that he wanted to use the anger in his heart to break the restriction in his body. The idea was good, but the reality was cruel. After taking only 2 steps, Lu Jinyang collapsed on the ground in the next second. Just like before, his entire body was twitching continuously. His body was bent into the shape of a bow, and both of his legs were hooked to his head. It was obvious that he wouldn't be able to break this restriction even with his strength. Thinking about it, this restriction was set up by the monster emperor. That kind of ancient god's cultivation had already transcended the mortal realm and entered the divine realm. How could a mere ascending cultivator resist it? Moreover, Lu Jinyang's ascending cultivation was obtained from the inheritance. How could he resist the inheritance? Lu Jinyang was still roaring angrily. Amidst the endless pain, the blood vessels in his body had already ruptured and his entire body was covered in a layer of blood mist. There was no need for the evil spirit to explain, as I understood that as long as his killing intent towards me didn't stop, he would never be able to get rid of the pain brought by the restriction. Looking at the person with the ascending cultivation rolling on the ground, everyone at the scene fell into silence. After a few minutes, Lu Jinyang suddenly stopped howling and his body returned to normal. He crawled up from the ground. He should have recognized the truth and given up on his hatred towards me. However, when I glanced at his face, I saw that his face was filled with the aura of death. It seemed that he had already decided to die. Without waiting for me to react, Lu Jinyang, who had stood up, glared at me. Without saying a word, he raised his hand and slapped the top of his head. He wanted to commit suicide. If he had been slightly slower, the evil spirit would have been able to stop him. However, Lu Jinyang was extremely ruthless towards himself. After crawling up from the ground, he didn't hesitate for even half a second. I sighed. I didn't think that it would end up in such a situation. In the end, before I could even finish sighing, I sucked in my breath again. Lu Jinyang's palm had already reached his head. However, with the strength of his ascending cultivation, the scene of his brain exploding didn't appear. On the contrary, it was like a normal person swatting a mosquito. His palm only gave off a small crisp sound. Apart from that, there wasn't even a red mark on his head. I was stunned. Lu Jinyang was also stunned. Only the evil spirit at the side coldly snorted. Seeking death? After obtaining my inheritance, do you think it's that easy to seek death? As I sunk into silence, I felt a tinge of guilt. Chapter 868. Looking at Lu Jinyang's pitiful state, no one dared to make a sound. Lu Jinyang stood there with an ashen face and didn't move for a very long time. In the end, a person walked out from the Metaphysics Association. It was Lu Qingyi, who I had met once before. He was also Lu Jinyang's father. After he walked out, he looked at me carefully. After confirming that I didn't intend to stop him, he walked to Lu Jinyang's side and said softly, "Jinyang, don't torture yourself like this. It's better to live than to die. As long as you're alive." Before he could finish his sentence, Lu Jinyang raised his hand and slapped him to the ground, causing him to roll over 10 meters away. Lu Jinyang seemed to have come back to life as he glared fiercely at his father, who was vomiting blood on the ground. He said angrily, "When you threw me into the blood sacrifice well, did you think that I'd rather live than die? You sent me to this path step by step, and now you're telling me to live. Why didn't you let me die in the first place? If you weren't my father, I would have killed you for what you said just now." Hearing Lu Jinyang's words, Lu Qingyi, who was lying on the ground, was filled with grief. He closed his eyes and buried his head deep in the ground, as though he couldn't bear to listen anymore. After Lu Jinyang vented his anger, he seemed to have woken up. The deathly stillness on his face disappeared, and was replaced with calmness. He didn't say a word and only lifted his head to look at me silently for a moment. Then he walked behind me and stood slightly further away from me, getting closer to the people from Dragon Tiger Mountain. From Lu Jinyang's current actions, he seemed to have accepted this matter. However, I understood in my heart that it was impossible for him to accept his fate so easily. It was just that he recognized the situation and no longer stubbornly resisted. If there was a chance in the future, he would definitely stab me in the back. However, I didn't mind. As long as the evil sacrificial spirit could suppress him, as long as he couldn't break through the monster emperor puppet seal, it didn't matter what he thought. Apart from that, from where Lu Jinyang was standing, I had a rough idea that the last key that appeared in the mausoleum of the Shang dynasty, the girl who looked exactly like Yi Pianpian and Yi Piaolan, had most likely fallen into the hands of Mount Longhu. Previously, Mount Longhu had been desperately searching for Lu Jinyang. Later on, they had ceased all activities. It was likely that they had reached an agreement with Lu Jinyang. I pulled my thoughts away from Lu Jinyang and turned around to wait for the others. The 10 great divine items had yet to be assembled, and Wu Yu had yet to arrive. The mountain and sea realm was far from opening. Soon after, I heard Buddhist chants from afar. I turned to look. A few seconds later, several people from the Tantra Buddhism sect appeared above the clouds. Although I've been to Tower Temple before, I've never seen these people before. However, the youth in the lead seemed to have a familiar object in his hand. Only when I looked carefully did I discover that the object in his hand was precisely the vast heaven pagoda that I left in Tower Temple. In that case, the vast heaven pagoda already acknowledged this youth as its master. This person is about the same age as me. Judging from his cultivation, he seems to be at the early stage of Yangshin. I think he is also an extraordinary person. After these people stood still, they didn't engage in conversation with anyone. It seemed that they were surrounded by unfamiliar faces, so they simply sat cross-legged on the clouds and began to meditate. After that, a few more people arrived. However, their cultivation bases weren't high, and they weren't united. I don't know which power they belonged to, but when they arrived, they simply hid in the distance and didn't approach us. The opening of the mountain and sea realm was a matter that concerned the entire world. Various powers would be drawn into it, so it was normal for unfamiliar faces to come here. Another hour passed, and a white-robed Yi Piaolan flew over and landed behind Nangong. I hadn't seen Yi Piaolan in years, and I had no idea where Nangong had hidden her. After all, she had once saved my life. I was about to thank her, but when I turned to look at her, I saw that her eyes were cold, as if she didn't want anyone to approach her. After thinking for a moment, I decided not to approach her. Ever since Yi Piaolan appeared, everyone's gaze is focused on us. Mount Longhu and the Metaphysics Society both had the keys, so their expressions were naturally much calmer. As for the Buddhists, they didn't seem to care. When they occasionally glanced over, they were smiling like Maitreya, and it was impossible to tell what they were thinking. After another half an hour, waves of demonic aura came from the distance. In the blink of an eye, dozens of monster race people landed on a cloud. Standing at the forefront was Yao Yao, wearing a long dress. Behind her stood the Lu tribe's Snake King. From the looks of it, Yao Yao's status was slightly higher than his. After looking at her for a moment, I was startled. I couldn't see through Yao Yao's cultivation. Could it be that she was already in the ascension stage? I asked the evil sacrificial spirit next to me. He was also looking at Yao Yao, and when he heard my question, he only nodded and said, "Early ascension stage. This last does have some talent." After receiving confirmation from the evil sacrificial spirit, I couldn't help but sigh in admiration. I looked at the crowd of monster race people and saw the fox girl who had fought by my side in Shenanjia. Seeing this, I suddenly remembered that the fox girl had said that Yao Yao had used her blood essence to solve the problem of the Qing Xiu tribe's bloodline. Not only that, but it had also greatly increased the cultivation of the trial participants. At that time, I was only thinking about how terrifying the Qing Xiu tribe bloodline was, but I didn't expect that Yao Yao had already advanced to the Sun God Ascension stage. The arrival of the monster race made the people from the Metaphysics Association and Dragon Tiger Mountain unable to sit still. Yang Shilong quickly stood up as the representative and said to the demon race, "How dare you evil beasts? Today, all of us from the righteous path are here. Don't think about running amok. If you leave now, I will spare your lives." As he spoke, an elder from Mount Longhu stood beside him. Their cultivation was obviously lower than Yao Yao's, but they didn't look afraid. It was obvious that they were relying on President Li and Sage Zhang. Yao Yao didn't respond after hearing their words. On the contrary, the Snake King's expression was gloomy. It was obvious that the two's words had offended the Snake King. The Snake King was the king of the Lu tribe, and he had never been criticized like that before. I had previously been to the Lu tribe and knew that the Lu tribe had a strict hierarchy. The Snake King wouldn't easily tolerate people who offended him. In that case, Dragon Tiger Mountain and the Metaphysics Association were going to suffer a bit. Just as the Snake King was about to explode, he was stopped by Yao Yao. Seeing Yao Yao like this, the Snake King could only retreat and ignore the two. Yao Yao's actions were based on what the High Priest had said to her. Perhaps the High Priest also knew that this wasn't the most important thing. Besides, if they wanted to open the mountain and sea realm, they would need the help of Dragon Tiger Mountain and the Metaphysics Association. From this point, it could be seen that the Snake King couldn't see the big picture as well as the High Priest. Even so, Yao Yao didn't pay attention to the two in front of her. She just looked around. Her actions put Yang Shilong and the Dragon Tiger Mountain Elder in an awkward position. If someone hadn't stepped forward to give them a way out, I'm afraid that the Metaphysics Association and Dragon Tiger Mountain would have chosen to save face and be forced to fight the monster race. When that happened, I would have had no choice but to help neither side. But in the end, the Metaphysics Association and Dragon Tiger Mountain would have had a miserable ending. Now that the mountain and sea realm was about to open, it was best not to add variables. With that in mind, I took the sacrificial spirit and flew back to the monster race. After I landed, I turned around and said to Yang Shilong and the Dragon Tiger Mountain Elder, "Seniors, there's no reason not to exterminate the devil and defend the Tao." However, that's not the main point today. If the two sides fight, both sides will suffer losses, and I'm afraid that we'll make a mistake. Yang Shilong and I were familiar with each other. Seeing that I had stepped forward to help them, he didn't say anything else. He just nodded to me and led the people of the Metaphysics Association back to their original position. The people of Dragon Tiger Mountain had always been overbearing, but today they were a bit strange. They didn't respond to my words and immediately left with Yang Shilong. After they left, I turned to look at Yao Yao. She looked happy and wanted to come over to chat with me. However, after thinking about it for a moment, I shook my head and said in a low voice, "Today's situation is special. It's not convenient for us to interact too much. Otherwise, it won't be good for me or the monster race." When Yao Yao heard this, she was stunned. She clearly didn't understand what I meant. However, the High Priest behind her seemed to have sensed something and whispered something into Yao Yao's ear. When Yao Yao heard that, her eyebrows relaxed. She nodded slightly and didn't say anything else. Not long after the monster race arrived, Wu Yu, who I had been thinking about, finally appeared. She carried the Fushi zither on her back and flew over on the clouds. I probed and realized that she already had a seal cultivation. After all, her soul was born from the Fushi zither. Since she had found the Fushi zither again, she would naturally re-establish a connection with it. The Fushi zither was an ancient divine artifact, and its spiritual power was rare in the world. It was logical for Wu Yu to use the Fushi zither to regain her cultivation. Moreover, when I left Medicine King Valley, I had buried pure Tao energy in her body. With its help, everything should be smooth sailing. While I was thinking, Wu Yu had already fallen behind me. The moment she appeared, everyone turned to look at her. Of course, their focus wasn't on Wu Yu, but the Fushi zither on her back. Most of them had never seen the top 10 divine artifacts. Now that they had the chance to see it, they naturally wouldn't miss it easily. However, while everyone was envious, the elders of Dragon Tiger Mountain had gloomy expressions. Whether it was Wu Yu or the Fushi Zither, they both had a deep relationship with Dragon Tiger Mountain. Back in Chiyo's tomb, if I hadn't interfered, Wu Yu would have been taken away by the people for Dragon Tiger Mountain. Previously, Nangong had also said that as long as one could control the top 10 divine artifacts, they would have the initiative to open the mountain and sea realm. The Fushi Zither was originally an important treasure of Dragon Tiger Mountain, but it was accidentally lost. Now that it appeared, it was standing with me. The people of Dragon Tiger Mountain would definitely be able to guess the reason. If it was said that Dragon Tiger Mountain was grateful to me for helping them out earlier, it would be gone now. However, Dragon Tiger Mountain had always done things this way, so I didn't mind. Instead, I turned around and asked Wu Yu if the trip had gone smoothly. After hearing that, Wu Yu's expression didn't change. She whispered that she was unharmed. When she arrived at Chiyo's tomb, she found that the Taoist priests of Dragon Tiger Mountain who had been trapped had already died. Chapter 869. After questioning Wu Yu, she stood behind me and kept silent for a while. Then, she asked me about Lu Ruxu's situation. At that moment, Lu Ruxu was by my side. However, it wasn't good for them to meet in such a situation. After I told her about the situation, Wu Yu nodded and didn't say anything. As the two of us were conversing, the Snake King, who was standing behind Yao Yao, stared at me with a gloomy expression. Looking at his expression, I knew that he didn't need to say anything to know that I was the one who had barged into the Lu clan. At that time, it was useless even if he found out. With his cultivation, I might not be able to defeat him, but with Yao Yao around, he could only swallow his anger. Speaking of Yao Yao, I was still curious about her advancement. When she had just arrived, everyone's gazes were focused on her. I didn't want to communicate with her, but now that everyone's gazes had dispersed, I might as well ask her about it. Of course, I didn't walk over to ask Yao Yao directly, but secretly used a secret technique to send her a telepathic message. Yao Yao wasn't surprised when she heard my telepathic message, and her expression didn't change. She stood at her original spot and sent me a telepathic message. She told me that ever since she advanced to Yang God, she had formed a monster core in her body. However, this monster core was different from the others in the Qingqiu tribe. The monster core in her body was wrapped in a layer of blood-red mist. At first, she was shocked and didn't know what the blood mist was. However, as she continued to cultivate, she realized that the blood mist didn't cause her any harm. Instead, it increased her cultivation speed. After some exploration, she realized that the blood mist was the Fox King's blood essence that she had obtained when she had advanced to Yang God realm. When the Fox King's blood essence had entered her body, although it had increased her cultivation, it hadn't been fully effective. After she formed the monster core, the power of the Fox King's blood essence had been fully displayed. Hence, apart from the secret technique that she had cultivated, she had been able to advance so quickly because of the support of the Fox King's blood essence. After hearing what she said, I felt relieved. The Fox King's blood essence was a drop of blood essence that Monster Emperor Jun had left in the Qingqiu tribe before he left. Monster Emperor Jun was an ancient god, and his blood essence naturally had the power of a god. It was reasonable that Yao Yao's power had increased greatly after absorbing it. In other words, after Yao Yao absorbed the Fox King's blood essence, her body also has the power of a god. Her blood essence more or less also has the power of a god. It was indeed feasible to solve the bloodline problem of the Qingqiu clan with her blood essence. Just as he was thinking, an auspicious cloud suddenly flew over from afar. At first, it was very far, but in the blink of an eye, it was right in front of him. Before I could react, the people of the Metaphysics Association and Mount Longhu knelt down. Now, I realized that it was President Li and Celestial Master Zhang. After realizing this, my heart skipped a beat. Let's not talk about Celestial Master Zhang for now. President Li, ever since I came into contact with the Metaphysics Association, many things that happened were inextricably linked to him. Most of the time, he was no different from Nangong He and the sacrificial evil spirit. He had been controlling many of my affairs in the dark. However, The strange thing was that after so many years, I had never seen his true face. While he was thinking, the auspicious cloud had already landed among the crowd. Looking up, there were 5 people and 1 beast standing on the auspicious clouds. Except for Yi Piampian and another woman who looked exactly the same as her, the other 3 people had white hair and long beards. Among the other 3 people, 2 had white hair and long beards, while the other person was wearing casual clothes. He looked about the same age as me, and his face was firm and determined, but he also had the air of an immortal. In front of them stood a colorful exotic beast. From the figure, I could vaguely recognize that it was the Qilin that I hadn't seen for a long time, but its appearance had changed greatly. I was a little surprised. When I had left the Peng Lai Immortal region, the Qilin hadn't left with me. At that time, I was still guessing what the Peng Lai sovereign was planning. However, I had never thought that the Qilin would change like this when I saw him again. I didn't know the reason for the Qilin's change, but I didn't want to look into it. My eyes returned to the 3 people. 2 of the elders were wearing long robes. One of them was the Peng Lai sovereign that I had met before, and the other had his hair combed into a bun. He wore a jade hairpin and held a horsetail whisk. Judging from his appearance, he must be Celestial Master Zhang of Mount Longhu. As for the other youth, I didn't dare to make a conclusion about his identity. Whether it was his appearance or his clothes, they were completely different from what I had imagined old President Li to look like. I stood in the distance with a solemn expression and didn't dare to act rashly. However, Yi Piampian was the first to notice me. She nodded at me from a distance, and I calmed down and nodded slightly in response. At this time, the young man next to Yi Piampian suddenly turned his head and looked at me with a smile that wasn't quite a smile. I had only seen the power in his eyes from the sacrificial evil spirits. Even when I was targeted by the Peng Lai sovereign, I didn't have such a strong feeling. With just one glance, I was certain of his identity. With his cultivation, he must be old President Li of the Metaphysics Association. After realizing this, I took a deep breath. I didn't know what I was feeling, and I didn't come back to my senses for a long time. The few people on the auspicious clouds had already separated and returned to their respective camps. The Peng Lai sovereign stayed where he was, while Celestial Master Zhang brought the woman who looked the same as Yi Piampian to the people of Mount Longhu. As I had imagined, the youth brought Yi Piampian back to the Metaphysics Association. I came back to my senses and felt that it was unimaginable. Judging from the old president's age, he should be an old man, but it was too strange for him to maintain his appearance like this. There were many cultivation techniques, and it wasn't strange to say that there were techniques to maintain one's appearance. However, with the old president's cultivation, he was no different from an immortal, so he naturally wouldn't pay attention to his appearance. What he displayed was undoubtedly his original appearance. After thinking for a while, I didn't continue to dwell on this issue. Instead, I thought about the specific cultivation of the old president, Celestial Master Zhang, and the Peng Lai sovereign. In terms of strength, the 3 of them were the ones with the highest cultivation. Thus, it was necessary to know their true strength. Thus, I asked the sacrificial evil spirit if it could see their cultivation. The evil spirit nodded and told me, "These 3 people's cultivation is similar to mine, half a step into the sunset realm." Half a step into the sunset realm? I was stunned for a moment, but then understood. It should be above the great circle of the dawn realm, just a hair away from ascending to the sunset realm. When I went to the Peng Lai immortal realm, I thought that it was the real immortal realm, and that the Peng Lai sovereign was also an immortal. But later, I realized that even though the Peng Lai immortal realm was in the sky, it wasn't the real immortal realm. Thus, their cultivation was in line with my speculations. As I was thinking, the evil spirit continued, "The immortal destiny of the mortal world has run out. It makes sense that these people call the mountain and sea realm the longevity sect." Although his words were spoken with certainty, they were also filled with mockery. I immediately understood what he meant. The reason these people wanted to open up the mountain and sea realm was to seek immortal destiny, to truly ascend to the heavens. Given their cultivation bases, they were already true immortals in a mortal world. If they wanted to advance further, they would have to truly ascend to the sunset realm. Thus, they were probably the ones who wanted to open the mountain and sea realm the most. As for the demon folk I was worried about, they probably didn't care at all. I couldn't help but think back to Nangong Hao's attitude back then. He and the others didn't seem to care at all about what the mountain and sea realms opening would bring to the mortal world. All they cared about was their own gains and losses. Now that I thought about this, I couldn't help but look over at the evil spirit. He was also someone who wanted to open the mountain and sea realm, but he was different from everyone else. He wanted to bring the demon folk out of the mountain and sea realm. Although I didn't like his goals, in some ways, he was the purest of them all. As matters stood, my heart was in chaos. I could only wait and see what would happen when the mountain and sea realm opened. As for what would happen, I would have to wait and see. Even as I was thinking about all of this, the young-looking president suddenly waved at me, indicating for me to go over. Seeing his movements, my first reaction was shock. After pondering for a while, I took a deep breath and walked over. I had only taken a single step when the evil spirit spoke up. "You can go over by yourself. There's no need to be nervous." Clearly, he meant that he would keep an eye on the president and that I didn't need to be afraid. With his guarantee, I felt much more at ease. I collected my thoughts and expressionlessly walked over. When I arrived in front of old President Lee, I tidied up my clothes and cupped my hands towards him. I respectfully called out, "Old President." Although my emotions were complicated, I owed him a debt of gratitude, and he had taken care of me on many occasions. No matter what his motives were, I couldn't ignore that fact. He seemed very satisfied with my attitude. He smiled and patted my shoulder. "Relax. There's no need to be so polite. I called you over because I felt that we should meet." Although the president had the appearance of a young man, his words were filled with the vicissitudes of life. He was no different from Lord Punglai and the others. I didn't know how to respond to his words, and my heart was still filled with anxiety. Suddenly, he took out something that looked like a jade plate from his robe. "Do you recognize this?" he asked. I lowered my head to take a look. There were dragon carvings and some simple drawings of human faces. At first glance, I recognized it. It was one of the 10 great divine tools, the Kong Tong seal. It was said that the Kong Tong seal was the divine tool that protected the D Kingdom in the Eastern Sea. This seal had existed since ancient times. The 5 sky emperors were carved on it: Tai Hao, Yin Emperor, Xiao Hao, Zhuanshu, East, South, West, North, and the Yellow Emperor in the center. A golden jade dragon coiled around the seal. It was said that it could make people immortal. Since ancient times, many alchemists had gone out to sea in search of this seal. However, in the end, they couldn't find it. Old President Lee's actions had always been profound, so I wasn't surprised that he had a godly weapon in his hands. However, I didn't know why he wanted to show it to me. Just as I was considering whether I should ask him, Nangong, who had been silent all this while, suddenly shouted, "The time has come." When I heard his voice, my heart trembled. Like everyone else, I turned to look at Nangong. The mountain and sea realm was about to open, and I didn't have time to worry about the president's situation. I was just about to bid him farewell, but before I could say anything, the president smiled at me and patted me on the shoulder. "Don't disappoint me, kid," he said. I was stunned. I still didn't understand what he meant, but I didn't think too much about it. I nodded and returned to Nangong's side. Chapter 870. Nangong had been preparing for the opening of the mountain and sea realm for thousands of years, and it was only natural that he would take the lead. However, even as a bystander, I couldn't help but feel nervous when faced with the shocking changes that were about to take place. Furthermore, I was the key person, which made me even more nervous. After taking several deep breaths, I forced myself to calm down, then turned to Nangong and nodded, indicating that I was ready. Nangong didn't say anything. He took out the jade bracelets from his robe and motioned for me to take them out as well. Earlier, Nangong had said that the 2 jade bracelets were needed to open the mountain and sea realm, but he hadn't mentioned whether or not they would remain after being used. To be safe, I summoned Tong Tong. However, I didn't have her stay by my side, but instead had her hide in the Shangliu pouch. After Tong Tong left, I handed the jade bracelets to Nangong. After receiving the bracelets, he paused for a moment. Every move he made affected the hearts of everyone present. This was something that hadn't happened in thousands of years, and everyone held their breaths in rapt attention. Even Nangong, who had always been calm and collected, seemed a bit nervous. However, he was also very excited. He took a deep breath, then slowly put the two jade bracelets back together. The two jade bracelets seemed to have opposite sides, and as soon as they came into contact with each other, they joined together. Then, the two jade bracelets flew away from Nangong's palm and shot off into the distance. When everyone saw this, they frowned, unsure of what was going on. A few seconds later, the place where the jade bracelets had disappeared was suddenly filled with the sound of a clap of thunder, illuminating the darkness of the night. After a few more claps of thunder, the clouds beneath their feet began to move forward at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not only that, but the surrounding area was also filled with gusts of wind that were no less powerful than the one that had appeared when Lu Jinyang had first appeared. Everyone reacted and used magical techniques to stabilize themselves. However, some of them were too slow and fell from the clouds. Even so, everyone was bitterly holding on, and not a single person took the initiative to leave. The opening of the mountain and sea realm was an unforeseen event that hadn't happened in thousands of years, and it was normal for it to be unpredictable. If nothing had happened, it would have been strange. As the clouds beneath their feet moved faster and faster, the gusts of wind grew stronger and stronger. In the blink of an eye, everyone was about to approach the place where the lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. However, at this moment, the clouds under his feet suddenly stopped, and so did the strong wind. Everything around him returned to normal. In the next second, a strange sound came from beneath the sea of clouds. At first, it wasn't very obvious, but it soon became louder. Everyone was like me, lowering their heads to look at the sea below. Waves rolled on the surface of the sea like boiling water, as if something was about to emerge. Soon, a piece of reef was the first to float to the surface of the sea. Strangely, there was a lush tree growing on this reef. Soon after, a second tree of the same appearance began to emerge from the water, and the area of the reef beneath it also began to expand. Not long after, dozens of trees were revealed, and the reef, which was originally only a few meters square, had expanded to a radius of several zhang. From the looks of it, the floating object was clearly a large island. Everyone looked puzzled, not knowing what this island was. I even guessed that it might be the mountain and sea realm, but after a moment, I shook my head and rejected the idea. Regardless of whether it was the information I'd obtained from the metaphysics world or what Nangong had told me, opening the mountain and sea realm required opening a door. This island really wasn't what I'd imagined it to be. Just as I was thinking, the evil sacrificial spirit seemed to see the puzzlement on my face and suddenly whispered in my ear, "The dense forest below is filled with ancient wild energy. You and I have been to this place before." Hearing his words, I was shocked at first, but then I realized that the thing that had emerged from the sea was actually Billows Mountain. Back then, the evil sacrificial spirit and I had come here to settle the matter with little Wang Li. That place was isolated from the rest of the world and had a dense, ancient wild energy. After experiencing many things, I didn't have the time to investigate the origin of Billows Mountain. Who would have thought that I'd once again see Billows' immortal mountain? Since it had appeared because of Yu Huan's summons, it clearly had an inextricable connection to the mountain and sea realm. I frowned slightly and thought for a while, but couldn't think of how this would affect the mountain and sea realm. As I was thinking, more than half of Billows Mountain had appeared, and the entire sea below us had been occupied by the dense forest of Billows Mountain. At this moment, everyone's gazes were even more serious, and they were closely watching the next movement of Billows Mountain. After another quarter of an hour, the entire Billows Mountain was revealed. But strangely, it didn't stop on the surface of the sea, but instead left the sea and slowly flew upwards. Although everyone present had high cultivation bases, seeing such a huge island fly up out of thin air, their eyes widened in shock. They nervously looked at the approaching island, their faces filled with different expressions. Following the approach of Lubo Hill, quite a number of people had already started to retreat, not daring to get too close for fear of attracting disaster. Their choice wasn't wrong. After Billows Mountain flew above the clouds, it suddenly moved horizontally, landing where we had previously been. By the time it landed, everyone had already retreated several kilometers away. After Billows Mountain moved horizontally to this place, it still didn't stop, but continued to fly upwards. I raised my head and instantly understood. Billows Mountain wasn't chasing after us. It should be chasing after the jade bracelet, and once again flew in the direction that the jade bracelet had disappeared. After flying upwards for a full quarter of an hour, Billows Mountain finally stopped. In the next second, there was a thunderous roar, and a bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, directly striking the peak of Billows Mountain. After the roar, the lightning didn't disappear, but instead connected Billows Mountain with something in the sky. I used my insight power to focus my eyes, and vaguely saw the place where the lightning came from, the jade bracelet that had previously disappeared. At this moment, it was spinning rapidly, as if it was absorbing some kind of energy from Billows Mountain. At this moment, the people who had previously scattered and fled had all returned to their positions, and they all looked up at the strange phenomenon in the sky. Perhaps even the old president, Celestial Master Zhang, and the other old monsters had never seen such a situation before. Everyone present was dazzled, and their expressions were strange and puzzled. Just as everyone was immersed in the strange phenomenon, suddenly, another object broke through the sky from afar, making a series of explosive sounds. One could tell that the speed of the newcomer was very fast. Everyone turned their heads, and only then did they realize that another huge object had appeared beside them. As it got closer, I could clearly see that the object flying towards us was the same as Billows Mountain, and it was also an island. However, as this island flew over, it emitted an abundant amount of spiritual energy along the way. This time, there was no need for the evil spirit to remind me. I recognized that this island was Penglai Immortal Island. When Han Wanan and I first came to this Penglai Immortal Realm, I felt that it was a little strange. Apart from the different auras on the island, the Penglai Immortal Island was almost identical to Billows Mountain. Now that I saw this scene, I realized that both Billows Mountain and the Penglai Immortal Realm should be related to the Mountain and Sea Realm. While I was thinking, the Penglai Immortal Island had already stopped in the same position as Billows Mountain. Immediately after, the previous scene appeared again. A thick bolt of lightning flashed, and Billows Mountain and the Penglai Immortal Island showed different scenes. One was dim and colorless, while the other shone with boundless light. It looked very much like the yin and yang of the Taiji yin and yang diagram. It wasn't difficult to understand. All living things had yin and yang. Just now, the jade bracelet had combined yin and yang, and now, the two immortal mountains were the same. In that case, it was highly likely that the two immortal mountains contained a complete world. Could it be the mountain and sea realm? The surrounding people were no less knowledgeable than I was, so they naturally made the same connection. Looks of surprise appeared on their faces. The originally silent crowd instantly burst into an uproar, chattering nonstop. Just as everyone was talking, the jade bracelet suspended between the two immortal mountains changed again. It seemed to have absorbed enough energy, and its spinning motion suddenly slowed down. Then, in the blink of an eye, it sped up again. The space around it began to tremble violently, as if an intense energy was about to explode out. Just as I expected, a few seconds later, the jade bracelet exploded with a deafening sound. Even though we were separated by a distance of 300 meters, it was difficult for our eardrums to withstand the power of the explosion. For those with lower cultivation, their eardrums were shattered by this sound, and traces of blood seeped out of their ear orifices. When the sound faded, the The blast wave from the jade bracelet's explosion hit us in the face. I could clearly feel the tyrannical power contained within the blast wave, and its power was far greater than the previous two gales. Fortunately, the blast wave wasn't very fast, so we had enough time to prepare. While I was still thinking, the evil sacrificial spirit next to me suddenly took a step forward and waved its hands. The shaman chi in its body surged out and enveloped the people of the shaman tribe. The people behind us all had seal cultivation bases, and without the help of experts, they wouldn't be able to resist the blast wave. When the people from the other camps saw the evil sacrificial spirit's actions, they immediately realized that danger was approaching. Apart from Mount Longhu, the Metaphysic Society, and the Monster Race, the other scattered factions didn't have any experts to protect them. Seeing that the situation was critical, these people were smart and decisive. They gathered together and exerted their strength, trying their best to deal with the incoming wave of air. The people of the Tantric sect, who hadn't moved before, finally stood up. They chanted Buddhist scriptures, and tens of thousands of golden swastikas flew out, forming a Buddhist barrier around them. After the barrier was formed, the blast wave finally came. Wherever it went, the clouds turned into smoke and dissipated. This showed the power of the blast wave. My cultivation base was close to breaking through, so I could see the true power of the blast wave. I was worried that the evil sacrificial spirit wouldn't be able to resist it alone. Then, the blast wave engulfed the people who had huddled together to resist it. Just as I expected, these people couldn't resist the power of the blast wave. In the blink of an eye, they turned into smoke, just like the clouds. Chapter 871. Hearing the evil spirit's words, Nangong and I didn't dare to be careless. We quickly circulated the witchcraft chi in our bodies to strengthen the barrier in front of us. The people of the witch tribe behind us didn't dare to hide at the back after witnessing the power of the airwave. Instead, they walked to our side and used their own techniques to try to share some of the burden. As for Wiyue and the fatty, they cultivate Dao Qi, so they can't use it at the same time as us. However, the fatty was quick-witted. He took out something from his pocket and tossed it into the air. In the blink of an eye, a faint yellow barrier appeared in front of us. After that, the fatty turned around and smiled at me. He seemed to be embarrassed. My cultivation isn't high, so I don't know if this formation will work. I'll give it a try. This fella had always been bold. At that moment, there wasn't much fear on his face. Instead, he seemed to be eager to try. I didn't have time to reply to him, as the air wave had already neared us and crashed into the witchcraft chi barrier in front of us. Just as the evil spirit had said, the air wave seemed to have the power to destroy heaven and earth. It caused the barrier in front of us to buzz as though it was going to break in the next second. It wasn't just us, it was the same for Dragon Tiger Mountain and the Metaphysics Association. President Li and Celestial Master Zhang looked solemn. The people from Tantra were in the most danger. Although Buddhist techniques were extremely profound, none of them had the ability to raise their cultivation, so it was difficult for them to withstand the airwave. Seeing the golden swastikas floating in front of them being swallowed by the air wave at a speed visible to the naked eye, the young man holding the Haotian pagoda suddenly stood up. His clear eyes were filled with determination. He raised his hand and tossed the Haotian pagoda forward as he chanted a Buddhist mantra. After a while, the Haotian pagoda returned to its original form. The young man didn't hesitate and immediately used the astral steps technique. I instantly understood the young man's plan. He wanted to activate the Haotian pagoda and bring the people from Tantra to hide in it. He wanted to use the power of the Haotian pagoda to resist the airwave. Soon, the Haotian pagoda opened. Just as I expected, the people from Tantra entered the Haotian pagoda. Then, the Haotian pagoda buzzed from the impact of the airwave, but didn't show any signs of collapsing. It was obvious that the young monk had made the right bet. If that's the case, then relying on the power of the God tool to contend with this chi wave, there's no need for us to work so hard. Although the clear heaven pagoda is not in my hands, Fatty controls the demon refining gourd, which can absorb everything in the world. Back then, I met the cloud of mist at Mount Kunlun, and it was also absorbed by the demon refining gourd. Perhaps this chi wave today can also be dealt with using this method. At that moment, the barrier in front of us had started to crack under the impact of the airwave. It was obvious that we couldn't wait any longer. Thus, I called out to the fatty and told him what I was thinking. At such a critical moment, the fatty did not dare to hesitate. Without any hesitation, he took out the demon purification gourd and threw it forward. The demon purification pot passed through the barrier in front of him and quickly rushed into the airwaves. Even without the fatty's control, the pot spat out green smoke on its own and merged with the airwaves. Several seconds later, the airwaves that had melted into the green smoke suddenly rose and dashed to the mouth of the demon purification pot. In the blink of an eye, the massive wave of air from before had all entered the mouth of the pot. After the demon purification pot had completely swallowed it, its body shook a few times before it returned to the fatty's hand. Seeing this scene, everyone, including me, let out a long sigh of relief. I stood up straight and no longer circulated my cultivation. I raised my head and looked around. At that moment, there were two people standing side by side with Old President Lee in the Metaphysics Association's camp. Old President Lee held the Kong Tong seal in his hand, while the two people beside him were Han Wenan and Su Kuan. Apart from Han Wenan, Su Kuan also had an item in his hand. After careful observation, I realized that the item in Su Kuan's hand was the divine tool, the Eastern Emperor Bell, that I had found in Billowing Waves Mountain. After I had found the Eastern Emperor Bell, I had returned it to Mount Lao. Now that it was in Su Kuan's hands, it seemed that the people of Mount Lao hadn't recognized him as its master. On the other hand, the Taoist camp was in a difficult situation. Only the horsetail whisk in Celestial Master Zhang's hand was floating in front of everyone. It seemed that he had used this item to resist the power of the airwaves. The Esoteric Buddhism Association, Metaphysics Association, and the Witch Tribe had all used divine tools to protect themselves. I didn't know what the horsetail whisk in Celestial Master Zhang's hand was, but it had the power of a divine tool. The resources of Mount Longhu couldn't be underestimated. When I looked at the Monster Tribe, they weren't so lucky. The Monster Tribe didn't have divine tools. Although there were some who had advanced in the same realm, the Monster Tribe's cultivation had always been inferior to the human tribes. Facing the airwaves, the Monster Tribe's Yang Spirit Realm experts had already summoned their Yao cores. They hadn't retracted them yet, and their faces looked dispirited. It seemed that they had been bitterly holding on just now. When the airwaves dissipated, everyone withdrew their techniques and looked at me with gratitude. I didn't know what attitude I should have when facing the Monster Tribe, so I didn't look at them again. Instead, I looked up at the sky. During the airwaves, the sky had changed again. The two immortal mountains were still there, but there was no sign of Yu Huan between them. All that was left was a hazy mist. The mountain and sea realm was most likely behind that hazy mist. In that case, we only needed to gather the 10 divine tools, as well as Yi Piampian and the others, and we would be able to open it. Without waiting for Nangong's signal, Old President Li took the lead, Han Wenan and Su Kuan, and stepped forward. At the same time, the people of the Tibetan Buddhism sect who had been hiding in the Clear Sky Pagoda returned to their positions. The young man with the Clear Sky Pagoda also strode toward Old President Li. Seeing this, I didn't want to delay, so I immediately followed him. However, before he could take a step forward, he was stopped by Nangong, who was beside him. I didn't know what his intentions were, so I asked him about it. After listening to me, Nangong's expression didn't change. Instead, he looked toward the horizon and said in a low voice, "There's no rush. Let's wait for one more person." After listening to Nangong's words, I was puzzled. Everything was ready, so who else should we wait for? I blurted out the question in my heart, but Nangong didn't say anything. He just signaled me to wait. The matters of the mountain and sea realm were decided by Nangong. Since he had said that, I could only do as he wished and wait quietly. The people from Mount Longhu and the Metaphysics Society were surprised to see our actions, and they all looked in our direction. In the face of such a major event, everyone was both nervous and expectant. Seeing that the people of the sorcerer tribe didn't move, they couldn't help but become anxious and started to talk. On the contrary, although old President Li and Celestial Master Zhang were frowning, they seemed to have some sort of tacit understanding with Nangong. Not only did they not question him, but they also waved their hands to stop their subordinates from making noise. This went on for an hour. Finally, Nangong's eyebrows twitched, and he said softly, "They're here." When he spoke, the evil sacrificial spirit had already sensed him and looked in the direction Nangong was looking at. Apart from him, old President Li, Celestial Master Zhang, and the others who had just ascended did the same. From their expressions, it was clear that the newcomer's strength wasn't ordinary, and he was most likely someone who had just ascended. When a mountain and sea realm opened, no one in the mortal world would be able to avoid its influence. All kinds of secluded cultivators, no matter what their intentions were, would inevitably come here. The situation was getting more and more complicated. While I was pondering, a white shadow dashed over from the horizon. The newcomer was too fast, and I couldn't see his face clearly. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in the crowd. Only then did I see him clearly. He wore a long robe the color of the moon, and his face was covered with a white beard. He looked old, but his face was glowing, and his every movement was full of the demeanor of an immortal. Before I could react, Mount Lao's people exclaimed in surprise. Then Lu Zongqing and the others knelt on the ground and said, "Greetings, Sect Master." Sect Master? This person is the Sect Master of Mount Lao? Is he the one that Nangong killed? With this thought, I turned to look at Nangong. He seemed to see my doubt and nodded. It's him. After Nangong's confirmation, my shock eased a little. Back in Wanwu Paradise, Nangong had told me that the Tao energy fluctuations in the Medicine King's Valley Cave belonged to the Sect Master of Mount Lao. After thinking about it, I was sure that Nangong and the Sect Master were plotting something. Now that I saw the Sect Master here, I was even more convinced of my suspicions. I also realized that what they were plotting had something to do with the mountain and sea realm, although I didn't know the reason. Since things had come to this, I thought it was time for Nangong to explain everything. "Nangong, what's going on?" I asked. This time, Nangong told me that he had given half a Niwa stone to the Sect Master. I immediately understood. No wonder the Sect Master had been willing to let Nangong kill him. He had wanted half a Niwa stone to revive his fleshly body. Then, with the help of the divine item, he had pushed his complete Yang spirit realm to the next step and reached the Ascension realm. Nangong wouldn't help someone for free. He must have made some sort of deal with the Sect Master. I didn't ask further. After all, it was a matter of the mountain and sea realm, so there was no need to get to the bottom of it. While I was thinking, the Sect Master signaled the people of Mount Lao to stand up. Then he greeted Celestial Master Zhang and turned to look at the people of the Metaphysics Society. However, his eyes didn't fall on President Li. Instead, they were fixed on Han Wennan, who was standing next to President Li. Seeing this, something flashed in my mind. Then, I remembered that Han Wennan had also used half of the Niwa stone to revive himself. Could it be that the Laozhan sect leader wanted to snatch the Niwa stone back from Han Wennan? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.